Chapter 443. Li Zhong rubbed his temples and said in a deep voice, "I know. Go back to the meeting point in Shunning City and ask if your Vice President Ding Zai has returned. If he has returned, ask him to come to see me immediately. If he hasn't returned, then wait for the news. When he returns, ask him to come to see me. There must be no delay." Since Lin Yuan had let Li Zhong know about the hidden dangers, he naturally had to give him a solution. Ding Zai, whose cultivation had suddenly skyrocketed, came from a force that was not weaker than the four united gang behind Kong Lezin. Ding Zai had appeared once before, and after intimidating the aristocratic forces led by Hu Yan, he hurriedly left the northern frontier. According to Lin Yuan, Ding Zai had gone to call for reinforcements. If he returned, he would definitely bring back a powerful person who could rival Kong Lezin. Of course, neither Li Zhong nor Lin Yuan were gamblers who had lost their eyes. Naturally, they would not bet all their bets on Ding Zai alone. Before leaving the northern frontier, Lin Yuan had specially instructed that if Ding Zai had not returned by the time Kong Lezin made trouble, or if he had not invited a powerful person who could contend against Kong Lezin, he had to personally go to the mountain gate of the Blood Divine sect and invite Yang Qinglin, who had been deliberately weakened by Lin Yuan but had always been guarding the Blood Divine sect. According to Ding Zai's intelligence, Kong Lezin had a conflict with Yang Qinglin for some reason not long after entering the northern frontier. Lin Yuan did not have the confidence to make Yang Qinglin and Kong Lezin fall out, but he believed that as a powerful person who had reincarnated from the ancient times, Yang Qinglin had left behind countless backup plans and trump cards. Otherwise, his former enemy would have either died or become a powerful person that ordinary people did not dare to imagine. In the face of an opponent of this level, even an old monster like Yang Qinglin might not have much chance of winning. Therefore, as long as Yang Qinglin was willing to deal with Kong Lezin, the northern frontier could continue to be peaceful for a period of time. Although Li Zhong didn't know where Lin Yuan's confidence came from, he had already reacted. Yang Qinglin had been secretly plotting for many years. Even old demon Blood Sea was trained by him. However, the Divine Blood Church was about to be eradicated by Lin Yuan. Coupled with the special geographical environment of the northern frontier and the appearance of Lin Yuan and Kong Lezin, the situation had become confusing. To outsiders, the northern frontier might be thriving. However, in Li Zhong's opinion, the northern frontier could be said to be in danger. It could be overturned at any time. However, Yang Qinglin did not leave the northern frontier even though his identity had been exposed. This meant two things. First of all, Yang Qinglin still had certain demands in the northern frontier. Before he achieved what he wanted to do, he would not leave. Second, the backup plan that Yang Qinglin had prepared before his reincarnation was in the northern frontier. Furthermore, these things gave him confidence that he could at least protect himself. Although Li Zhong knew that Yang Qinglin, a reincarnated demon, was coveting the northern frontier and most likely did not have good intentions, Kong Lezin wanted to overturn the entire northern frontier and turn the northern frontier into a living hell. In comparison, Yang Qinglin could slowly negotiate. For the sake of all the living beings in the northern frontier, it was acceptable to sacrifice some people when necessary. Yes. The messenger of the Association of the Demon Emperor cupped his fist at Li Zhong and stepped out of Li Zhong's office. After the messenger of the Association of the Demon Emperor left, Li Zhong reached out and gently knocked on the table in front of him. A guard in bright silver armor pushed open the door of the office and walked in with majestic steps. He looked at Li Zhong with burning eyes and said in a deep voice, "My lord, what orders do you have for me? I'll have to trouble you to run an errand and invite Uncle Gao over." After Li Zhong finished speaking, he furrowed his brows imperceptibly. Then, he lowered his voice and said, "Zhang Qilin, I'll have to trouble you to make a trip there as well. Tell them to drop everything on hand and come to me as fast as possible. I have something important to discuss with them." The guard cupped his fist at Li Zhong and left after receiving the order. After all his orders were issued, Li Zhong let out a long sigh of relief. His expression was somewhat strange. According to Lin Yuan's original plan, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier did need to be taught a lesson. However, the profits that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could bring were enough to make these aristocratic families in the northern frontier bow their heads and obediently become the evil hounds of the northern frontier prince's mansion to deal with the dirty business. It was a pity that these guys were so insatiable. They felt that the benefits in their hands belonged to them. If anyone wanted to take the fruits of their labor, it would inevitably lead to a crazy counterattack. That was why these aristocratic families in the northern frontier were still stubbornly resisting Lin Yuan's rule. Although there were many aristocratic families in the three cities, as 3 of the 7 original border cities, the officials that Lin Yuan arranged in these 3 cities were almost all from humble backgrounds. They were people that Lin Yuan could trust. Moreover, the Northern Battlefront Army, the Embroidered Uniform Guards, and the Association of the Demon Emperor had arranged for a large number of people to be stationed in these 3 cities. In addition, there were also many demi-human tribes nearby. Once there was a riot, it would inevitably lead to a thunderous rage. Unless there was a considerable military force, it would be extinguished in an instant. However, the current situation was that the local government cooperated with the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. The Embroidered Uniform Guards and the Demon Emperor pretended to be deaf and mute. Even the demi-human tribes nearby didn't send any requests to participate in the war. Li Zhong felt that anyone with a discerning eye could see that Lin Yuan had a murderous intent. He wanted to wipe out the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. However, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier didn't have a source of information like Li Zhong did. They were more willing to believe that this was because Wang Liu of the northern frontier couldn't catch him and Lin Yuan wasn't in the northern frontier. This was a sign that they were about to do something big. Thinking of this, Li Zhong stood up and walked out of the office. He said to the guards at the door, "Go beat the drum and raise the tent." The people in Taicang, Pingwang, and Min and cities might have rebelled. Although this king has already dispatched troops to surround and suppress the rebels, this king hasn't been in office for long and the northern frontier is facing such a big change. If he doesn't lead the troops himself, wouldn't it bring shame to the prestige of the imperial palace in the northern frontier? Yes. One of the 2 guards bowed slightly and quickly left the place. Ding Zai, who had just walked into the courtyard, narrowed his eyes slightly. As Lin Yuan's collaborator, Ding Zai certainly knew some things that outsiders didn't know. For example, the title of King of the Northern Frontier was unnecessary. The reason why Lin Yuan let Li Zhong inherit the title of King of the Northern Frontier was to use Li Zhong's hand to tell the people of the Northern Frontier that even if the King of the Northern Frontier violated the written laws of the Northern Frontier, he would still be punished. One of the rules was that the Imperial Palace Guards were not allowed to leave Shunning City. Li Zhong was taking advantage of the opportunity to splash dirty water on him. Chapter 444. South of Shunning City, there was a plain 150,000 li away. Li Zhongxing's camp. Li Zhongxing, who received the secret report from his bodyguard, rubbed his swollen temples. His face changed several times, and he said in a deep voice, "What is the purpose of sending this news to me? I was ordered to fight against the rebels in the north, but I didn't say that I have to deal with the internal troubles of the northern frontier." The guard's eyes flickered. He reached out to stroke his beard and said with a smile, "Marshal, you're wrong. Now that the scale of the Southern Expedition Army has reached 5 million soldiers, there won't be any rebel army that dares to take advantage of this opportunity to cause trouble within 1,000,000 miles of the northern region. Marshal, you can let your men continue to suppress these rebels. But now that the northern frontier is in chaos, why don't you lead a side division to reinforce the northern frontier?" Speaking of this, the bodyguard's eyes turned cold. He said in a deep voice, "This is our best chance." Originally, the southern expedition from the northern frontier had 3 million soldiers. After this period of expeditions, it was estimated that only 600,000 soldiers were left. Now, the main force of the southern expedition was selected from the rebels. After simple training, they were not so elite that they could fight with any army without falling into a disadvantage, but at least they knew how to listen to orders and obey the command. They had the characteristics of a strong army. More importantly, the main force of the rebels were not from the northern frontier. Although they knew about the illustrious reputation of the Black Jiao, they only heard about it from hearsay. They did not have much respect for the Black Jiao. On the contrary, Li Zhongxing, who led them all the way, was more popular in this army. The army these days was like this. The commander did not need to inform the soldiers under him. Li Zhongxing only needed to leave the generals who respected the Black Jiao to continue fighting against the rebels, and he personally led the rebels and the new army to the northern frontier. When the time came, they would join the army of the aristocratic families, Xin Lin Jun's reserves, and even Zhang Qilin's confidants. Then they would succeed. Even if the Black Jiao wanted to retaliate, The Xinwu dynasty would definitely send an elite army and some high-level cultivators to support the northern frontier after receiving the news. The Black Jiao, who had become Lei Qiuxing's mortal enemy, would be firmly pressed into the Hengduan Mountains. They would not give the Black Jiao any chance to cause trouble again. Pah! It was not Li Zhongxing's hesitant or resolute voice that responded to the bodyguard. Instead, it was a sharp and loud crack of the horsewhip. The whip heavily hit the guard's face, waking him up from his beautiful dream. He looked at Li Zhongxing in disbelief. Although I'm not a famous general, I'm not so stupid as to be played in the palm of someone's hand. Do you really think that you've hidden your dirty dealings with the aristocratic families of the northern region so well that no one knows about it? Li Zhongxing whipped the guard and mounted his horse with a disgusted expression. He said coldly, "Before I left the northern frontier, I was indeed a little hesitant. After all, for so many years, His Majesty had been in charge of the imperial capital, and the aristocratic families had cooperated with the government to govern the place. Although there were many filthy things, it was still a scene of peace. However, after leaving the northern frontier, I was shocked by what I saw and heard." "Commander?" Only then did the guard come back to his senses. He opened his mouth, but he did not know what to say. After all, the northern frontier was a paradise. It was not said by his own people, but by the refugees who had fled to the northern frontier. The people of the northern frontier even disapproved of it. After all, other than the chaos when the demonic beasts attacked the city, they had been living under the protection of Lin Yuan for so long. Naturally, they had not experienced what kind of purgatory the outside world was. Just by pooling money and food from a few local aristocratic families, they could support a rebel army of more than 100,000 people. Large and small warlords fought and swallowed each other on this piece of land. Small warlords became big warlords, and the aristocratic families could not afford to support them. They occupied the land and called themselves kings, learning from the imperial court and collecting taxes and food from the people in their territory. They even took away the taxes and food that would be collected decades later. To put it nicely, it was collecting taxes, but to put it bluntly, it was robbing. But that was not the main point. If you want to rob, then rob. At the very least you have to ensure that there is peace, right? But not all rebel armies had the strength of a regular army. When several factions fought against each other, the stronger ones would still be fine, but the weaker ones would be beaten back repeatedly. It was not rare for a city to change hands several times, and the people in these cities would have to pay taxes several times a day. Even the aristocratic families would not be able to handle it, not to mention the commoners. The roadside would be littered with bones. Although everyone knew that the northern frontier was a paradise, in the chaos of war, even if they did not go out, disaster could befall them, not to mention taking the risk to migrate to the northern frontier. Even if they had the idea, they did not have the ability to do so. Furthermore, the one controlling the northern frontier was a demonic beast. In the environment of the Sky Martial continent, not only were demonic beasts hostile to humans, humans were also hostile to demonic beasts. They did not think that the Black Jiao would be like what the rumors said, worrying that they would be reduced to food for demonic beasts if they took the risk to go to the northern frontier. You aristocratic family's disciples are all ungrateful wretches, hiding the wild ambitions in your hearts all day long, scheming and scheming in order to obtain more benefits for yourself. But no one has ever thought about whether the commoners will be able to survive. In this aspect, even a demonic beast can do better than you. Don't you feel ashamed? Li Zhongxing, who was riding on horseback, spat out a mouthful of saliva in disgust and said coldly, "I'm ashamed to be in the same group as you." The main reason why Li Zhongxing was hesitant to betray Lin Yuan was because the commoners of the northern frontier were living in peace and contentment. But the aristocratic families of the northern frontier wanted to drag the northern frontier into the flames of war for their own benefits. This had undoubtedly violated Li Zhongxing's bottom line, and at the same time, strengthened the idea in Li Zhongxing's heart. The world was already like this, it was fucking revolting. If Lin Yuan really had the disposition of a mighty ruler, the northern frontier would naturally not be able to restrict his steps. Even the entire north, in Lin Yuan's eyes, was just a stepping stone. If the commoners of the world could be as peaceful as the northern frontier, even if he carried the infamy of a traitor in the Xinwu dynasty, what could he do? Without waiting for the personal guard to struggle, Li Zhongxing urged his horse forward, and immediately, 7 to 8 military judges holding long swords surrounded him. The leading military judge looked at the personal guard with a smile that was not a smile, and sneered, This young master, please. The third son of the Su family head of Taizong, rarely known for his talent, but today, it seems that he is only Zo. But it has really been difficult for you to actually be able to disguise yourself as a scoundrel and sneak into the southern expedition, and even become Marshal Li's personal guard. Chapter 445. At this point, the military judge took 2 steps forward and pierced third young Master Su's abdomen with his saber. He then took 2 steps closer and said in a low voice, "My commander-in-chief asked me to thank third young Master Su on his behalf. If it weren't for you, Commander Li might really have sided with the Shenwu dynasty." Third young Master Su's pupils shrank to the size of needles. Now that things had come to this, how could he not know that he had been schemed against? In the entire northern frontier, the only person who could be called commander-in-chief was Luo Su, who had single-handedly suppressed the aristocratic families of the northern frontier and the association of the Demon Emperor. His identity had probably been thoroughly investigated by the spies of the Embroidered Uniform Guard before he had entered the southern expedition. Even the troubles he had encountered when he had been promoted had been dealt with by the Embroidered Uniform Guard in secret. Their goal had been to persuade Li Zhongxing to attack the northern frontier's prince's mansion and provoke Li Zhongxing's anger and rebellious mentality. Third young Master Su was just about to speak when the military judge covered his mouth with one hand. The other hand that was holding the saber suddenly twisted and opened a huge bloody hole in third young Master Su's abdomen. Fresh blood spurted out and splattered all over his body. The military judge did not relax at all. The two of them maintained this position until third young Master Su's eyes dimmed and his body became slightly stiff. Only then did the military judge withdraw his saber and retreat. He waved his hand to summon a military judge beside him and said slowly, "Find an opportunity to leave the army and return to Anhan City to report that the southern expedition's disaster has been eliminated and that there won't be any more changes in the short term. I will continue to follow Li Zhongxing's trail." "Yes, Lord Qianhu." The military judge who was summoned had a solemn expression and replied in a low voice. The Embroidered Uniform Guard and the Association of the Demon Emperor had managed the northern frontier so well that even if the spies of the Embroidered Uniform Guard managed to infiltrate, they wouldn't dare act rashly without receiving orders from their superiors. However, outside of Shunning City was the territory of the elites of the Embroidered Uniform Guard for many years. Even in Li Zhongxing's southern expedition, who knew how many spies of the Embroidered Uniform Guard had infiltrated? Therefore, the information regarding third young Master Su was quickly sent to Lei Qiusheng. After reading the entire story, Lei Qiusheng's face immediately flushed red. Even smashing the 4 treasures of the study and all kinds of ornaments into pieces was not enough to vent his anger. It was only when the entire imperial study was smashed into ruins that Lei Qiusheng stormed out of the imperial study. On both sides of the imperial path were eunuchs and palace maids kneeling on the ground. They were all trembling and did not dare to look directly at Lei Qiusheng. The only one who was still standing was Zhang Xiao, who was dragged over by the head eunuch to save the situation. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger." Zhang Xiao took off the black pointed hat on his head. His fair face was filled with exhaustion. The northern frontier is just a small storm. With that Black Jiao's methods, he will be able to quickly deal with these troubles. Because they had reached an agreement with Lin Yuan, the Embroidered Uniform Guard could now begin to send spies to the northern frontier. Even though the names and identities of these spies were in Lin Yuan's hands, the spies that had been hiding in the northern frontier could now be put to use again. Moreover, there was no need to worry about the Embroidered Uniform Guard in the future. In order for this matter to meet his expectations, Zhang Xiao had been rushing between the various cities in the north. He had just finished his tasks and returned to the imperial capital. Before he could rest, he suddenly heard that the spies under his command had sent the information regarding the northern frontier to Lei Qiusheng's imperial desk. He immediately turned pale with fright and rushed to the imperial capital without stopping. However, he was still a step too late. By the time he arrived, Lei Qiusheng had already smashed most of the ornaments in the imperial study. He still showed no signs of calming down. Just from Lei Qiusheng's reaction, Zhang Xiao knew that this tyrannical emperor was going to bring up the decree that she had been persuaded to issue when she had first ascended to the throne. "Zhang Xiao, you are a close official by this humble one's side. Do you really think that this humble one will be able to quell his anger at this time?" Lei Qiusheng stared at Zhang Xiao with bloodshot eyes like a fierce tiger choosing its prey. He roared, This humble one knows that the aristocratic families of the various lands want to take advantage of this time to eliminate their enemies so that they can occupy more territory and allow their descendants to smoothly enter the Shenwu dynasty's military system. This humble one knows all of this, so this humble one can tolerate the existence of rebel armies. As long as they don't send troops to attack the imperial capital, this humble one will not go too far. But now, Lei Qiusheng's angry voice echoed in the surroundings. In just a moment, his face was already flushed red. However, he continued to roar. Even if this humble one wishes that Black Jiao to die early, as the ruler, I have to say that it has done well. Taking away the lands in the hands of the aristocratic families is removing their claws and fangs. This humble one does not believe that the profits that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce brings to them can't compare to the few pieces of land in their hands. However, what is their choice? They still choose to play petty tricks. They even did not hesitate to overturn the northern frontier in hopes of driving out the Black Jiao and its northern frontier king. They want the northern frontier to return to its former state. This clearly shows that they have not given up on their desire to be a subject. Without land, no matter how much money they had, they might not be able to buy enough food during a rebellion. If there was another time of chaos, the aristocratic families would not be able to support an army. They would not be able to wantonly wipe out their enemies like they were today, and use the simplest and most brutal methods to obtain profits. However, if one were to talk about profits, the income that the few pieces of land in the northern frontier could bring in a year was not even 1/10,000th of what the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could bring in. The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was not to be underestimated. As the only profitable project that Lin Yuan had at hand, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could afford to pay the salaries of all the officials in the northern frontier and the replacement of the soldiers' equipment. Even the reform of the northern frontier and the establishment of new colonies were all provided by the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Furthermore, even after being squeezed to this extent, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce still had the ability to provide for the northern frontier aristocratic families. There was almost no business in the world that was more profitable than the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. When ordinary people saw the northern frontier aristocratic families rebelling, they might just think that they were going all out and were unable to swallow the anger of being suppressed. However, in the eyes of a wise ruler like Lei Qiusheng, it was obvious that the northern frontier aristocratic families did not want to lose the provisions that were provided to their private armies every year in preparation for a time of chaos. Lin Yuan's point of view was similar to Lei Qiusheng's. In fact, Lin Yuan was even angrier. This was because he had already given the northern frontier aristocratic families enough face and given them a chance. However, now they did not even talk about profits. Not only did they wipe their mouths and not acknowledge the debt, they even wanted to seize the opportunity to occupy the entire northern frontier and control the operations of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Chapter 446. Your Majesty, anger will not solve the problem. On the contrary, it will make you lose your rationality and make things even more troublesome. Zhang Xiu's pale forehead was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. He lowered his voice and said, "That Black Jiao has already destroyed the courage of those people on the northern frontier. On the surface, they don't care about life and death and want to fight with the Black Jiao, but in reality, they are certain that the Black Jiao will not do anything to them on account of the fact that most of the officials on the northern frontier are from noble families." Lei Qiusheng narrowed his eyes slightly, his gaze pausing on Zhang Xiu's face. He did not understand why Zhang Xiu would say such words that boosted the morale of others and destroyed his own prestige. Even if he was the nominal ruler of the northern frontier and could not tolerate a monster overstepping his control of the northern frontier, Lei Qiusheng could not tolerate the fact that these noble families were not loyal to him. If possible, he even wanted to lead his army north to reinforce the northern frontier and destroy the prestige of these noble families on the northern frontier. However, the Black Jiao is not an ordinary person. He is a true hero with the characteristics of an emperor. He will not be troubled by temporary difficulties. Now that the noble families on the northern frontier have shed all pretense of cordiality, the Black Jiao will not show any mercy. All the noble families on the northern frontier who participated in the rebellion will definitely be cleansed by the northern frontier prince's estate. Even those who did not participate in the rebellion will not be able to escape the pursuit of the northern frontier prince's estate as long as they are found to be related to this matter. None of them will have a good ending. I am telling your Majesty this not to boost the morale of others and destroy our own prestige, but to tell your Majesty a simple thing. That is, the Black Jiao can do these things, but your majesty cannot. If you want to deal with the current situation with the policy of cleansing the noble families and sects after ascending to the throne, I am afraid that not only will the nobles and officials dissuade you, but it will also greatly affect the current situation. Even the rebel army will unite and attack the imperial city together to pull you down from the throne. With a bitter smile on his face, Zhang Xiu continued. The Black Jiao has been preparing for this for a long time. First, he used the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce as bait to entice the noble families on the northern frontier to help the sections. After eliminating the sects, he used Li Zhong to plot against the noble families on the northern frontier. Even though he has made many preparations, Lin Yuan still has no intention of letting the noble families on the northern frontier go. In Lin Yuan's eyes, the noble families on the northern frontier were not a threat. They were not even existences that had to be eradicated. As long as the noble families were obedient, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could easily let them make a lot of money. However, Lin Yuan had already given the noble families enough face. If the noble families on the northern frontier still had their own little plans, then Lin Yuan would not let these noble families on the northern frontier continue to live. However, Lin Yuan could give up the stage and let the northern frontier prince's residents wield the butcher's knife because Lin Yuan had already eliminated the sects and taken away the noble family's land. This made the entire northern frontier people hate the noble families to the core. With these three factors, in addition to the fact that the northern frontier was not big and was known for being bitter and cold, the only noble family that could stand on the stage was the Qiao family. There was no need to mention the rest as they were not difficult to deal with. There was also the southern expedition outside, which was the finishing touch. No noble family's power could cross the southern expedition's line of defense. As long as Li Zhongxing did not stand on the side of the noble families on the northern frontier, Li Zhongxing could just turn around and devour the noble families behind them. He could even use this as an excuse to wipe out the noble families of the northern frontier. No one would have the chance to support the noble families on the northern frontier. The noble families of the northern frontier had these two factors. Even someone as scheming as Zhang Xiu could not think of a way out for the noble families on the northern frontier. Therefore, although the turmoil on the northern frontier had angered Lei Qiuxing had never considered that the noble families on the northern frontier could really change the situation on the northern frontier. Making Lin Yuan take the initiative to call back the southern expedition to suppress the noble families on the northern frontier was just a small interlude in the overall situation. Sooner or later, they would be completely crushed by Lin Yuan. What Zhang Xiu was more worried about was that Lei Qiuxing wanted to learn from Lin Yuan's methods and wipe out the noble families in the Shenwu dynasty. Lin Yuan could do this easily. However, if Lei Qiuxing wanted to do this, then all the sects and noble families in the Shenwu dynasty would not wait for him to kill them. This rebellion that shook the entire dynasty would definitely reach a new level. At that time, the noble families would not only think of attacking their enemies. They would first wipe out the Black Jiao and Lei Qiuxing in the northern frontier. With these two people in the world, the threat to the noble families and sects would definitely increase day by day. If the Black Jiao can do it, why can't I do it? Lei Qiuxing's face instantly darkened. He said coldly, "My dear minister, are you looking down on me?" Zhang Xiu reacted quickly. He reached out and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, what I mean is that although this matter is of great benefit to the country, it needs to be done at the right time. Now that the noble families control the court and the local government, even if your Majesty issues a decree, it will be useless. They will use all kinds of excuses to delay the execution and secretly convey your Majesty's intentions to the rebels, causing the turmoil to become more and more difficult to control." Lei Qiuxing's expression became increasingly gloomy, as if water was about to drip out. He said coldly, "Then what you mean is that I should just watch as these aristocratic families become increasingly disloyal. Once I die, I'll let them erupt and seize this country? Your Majesty's longevity is boundless and your martial prowess is unparalleled. How can you be schemed against by these flies and dogs?" Zhang Xiu shook his head gently. The corners of his mouth curled up into a cold arc. He said coldly, "What I mean is that although we can't do this, we can leave it to the Black Jiao and the Azure Peng King to do it. Firstly, they are fighting with these noble families. It's just a matter of whether they do it cleanly or not. With your Majesty's decree, do they dare to not eliminate the root of the problem? Secondly, the two of them also have rebellious intentions. The noble families are not so easy to eliminate. If the two of them do this, They will naturally not be popular in the court in the future. Perhaps the noble families can be used to balance the Black Jiao and the Azure Peng King, so that none of them can threaten your majesty's country. Oh, Lei Qiusheng stroked his beard. He was deep in thought. Zhang Xiu was delighted. He struck while the iron was hot and said, "The noble families of the south have deep roots. Just the Azure Peng King alone can suppress the rebels. Even if we take the opportunity to eliminate 10 small noble families, we won't be able to make any progress. Moreover, we will lose the support of the people. Although the noble families of the north are easier to deal with than the noble families of the south, the northern territory is so big that the Black Jiao can't take it all. Even if it can, it doesn't have enough money to invest in construction and reform. When the time comes, your majesty can pick the peaches of the Black Jiao with a decree." Chapter 447. It's possible, but... Lei Qiusheng carefully considered for a moment, but his brows were tightly knitted together. Whether it was the Black Jiao or Lei Qiuming, in Lei Qiusheng's eyes, they were not small threats. Both of them were ambitious and ruthless. With the shrewdness of these two, the Xinwu dynasty clearly wanted to use their hands to cleanse the aristocratic families, sects, and other forces. Why would they tarnish their own reputation? They knew that once Lei Qiusheng recovered, he would not treat them well, but they would still obediently follow his orders. After all, Lei Qiusheng had already shown his weakness by asking them to wipe out the rebel army. Under such circumstances, Lin Yuan's actions of sending troops to suppress the rebel army in the north without saying a word was already very generous. Lei Qiuming in the south was still biding his time at this moment. He probably wanted to squeeze a large amount of benefits out of the Xinwu dynasty before he was willing to take action. As a close official of the emperor, Zhang Xiu could naturally see Lei Qiusheng's worries. Moreover, the two of them were close, so he naturally had no scruples. Soon, Zhang Xiu nodded and said, "Whether the Black Jiao in the north is willing or not, his actions in the northern frontier are enough to make these aristocratic families and sects view him as their #1 enemy. If he wants to live a stable life, he cannot have these existences in his territory. Moreover, the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition is Li Zhongxing, a reserve soldier who left from Shenlin June. Your Majesty, do you think that Li Zhongxing will treat your secret edict as correct? Once the southern expedition and the aristocratic families in the north have a falling out, that Black Jiao will have to bite the bullet and fight." Speaking up to this point, Zhang Xiu paused. The corner of his mouth suddenly rose and he said eerily, "The one in the south will not fight, but whether he fights or not is not up to him. Although the aristocratic families in the south have rebelled, none of them are afraid of your Majesty's throne. What they want is the control of the sea trade and the bulk of the income. Now that the south is in chaos, no one can gain anything. If your Majesty can show the courage and promise the sea trade to the winner, these people will definitely fight for it." Ugh! Lei Qiusheng fell into deep thought once again. There was no need to elaborate on the Black Jiao's situation. In the past, although the aristocratic families and sects were wary of Lei Qiusheng, they hadn't fallen out with him yet. They hadn't reached the point where they would fight with each other. However, the Black Jiao was cleansing the sects and aristocratic families. In a short period of time, the Black Jiao had replaced Lei Qiusheng as the greatest threat to these people. It could even be said that as long as the Black Jiao was still alive, they wouldn't be able to sleep. Conversely, the Black Jiao's attitude towards these people was the same. As for the maritime trade in the south, this was the bulk of the national tax revenue. If it wasn't a last resort, Lei Qiusheng would definitely not be willing to hand it over. If Lei Qiusheng was also part of the rebel army, he could naturally play the game of mutual deception and not admit his mistakes. However, he wasn't part of the rebel army. He was the legitimate emperor of the Xinwu dynasty. The outstanding talents of the aristocratic families from all over the country were gathered under his banner. When he opened his mouth, it was the golden rule. He definitely couldn't take advantage of the situation afterwards. This was Lei Qiusheng's biggest concern now. Otherwise, how could he, the emperor of a country, not think of a plan that even Zhang Xiu could casually come up with? Your Majesty, if you are indecisive, you will be in trouble. However, Zhang Xiu directly knelt in front of Lei Qiusheng and said loudly, "If I may be so bold as to say something taboo, the times have changed. Not only are the aristocratic families and sects threatened, but so is the maritime trade. In the past, when we traded with the dynasties that weren't connected to our borders, We could only use this sea route. Not only did it take a long time, but we also had to give up a large amount of profits to the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas every year. Even so, the sea is boundless and there are too many monsters outside the control of the Dragon Palace. We still can't guarantee 100% safety. However, once the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is established, things are completely different. Although the monsters in the Hungduan Mountains aren't easy to deal with, at least they are suppressed by the Monster King Court. They won't be as chaotic as the monsters in the sea. As long as the Black Jiao exists, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce won't be destroyed and the profits from maritime trade will be greatly reduced. As long as the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is willing to pay tribute, the north of the Shenwu dynasty will be our biggest source of income in the future. Although the aristocratic families in the south and the aristocratic families in the north were called aristocratic families, the difference in strength between the two sides was not small. The main reason for this was the existence of maritime trade. This sea route that connected the seven dynasties supported too many aristocratic families. As long as there were enough resources, any kind of weapons, armor, grain, and supplies could be bought from the other six dynasties. Moreover, the land in the south was fertile. Often, the output of the northern frontier was enough for the entire Shenwu dynasty to consume for a year. This was also the reason why the northern frontier was called the Land of Bitter Cold. After all, there were many mountains in the north and the threat of monsters. The land that could be cultivated was really too little. However, the appearance of Lin Yuan completely broke this situation. The land route used by the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was not only safe, it was also faster and faster. Moreover, it was faster and on a larger scale. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people coveting it. After all, although the speed of a ship was faster than a carriage, it was inevitable to take a detour on the sea. Other than the chaotic monsters in the sea, the evil cultivators and pirates who lived in remote islands were enough to make every sea route bear the threat of being stabbed at the back. This humble one knows, but... Lei Qiuxing lightly shook his head and said expressionlessly, but if this is the case, wouldn't this humble one's weak spot be firmly grasped by that Black Jiao? This humble one has decided to eliminate the Black Jiao and Lei Qiuming, these two traitors, after everything is settled. However, you want this humble one to rely on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Doesn't this mean that this humble one must leave the Black Jiao behind? Without the Black Jiao, the Monster King Court would not care about the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Once the Black Jiao was eliminated, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce would definitely collapse. At that time, the maritime trade would also be thrown to the aristocratic families. The entire royal family would be firmly grasped by others. Then this humble one has no other choice. Zhang Xiu did not try to persuade him anymore. He spread out his hands like a hoodlum with a trace of helplessness on his face. Lei Qiuxing was indeed a monarch who could suppress an era. However, his biggest flaw was that he was headstrong and self-opinionated. He did not listen to the advice of others and hoped to control everything in his hands. He wanted to become the most powerful monarch since the founding of the human countries. This way, when people talked about him, they would say that Lei Qiuxing was a monarch throughout the ages and not a thief who plotted a rebellion to sit on the throne. Facing such a monarch, even someone like Zhang Xiu, who was close to Lei Qiuxing, did not dare to say too much. He could only give his own opinion and let Lei Qiuxing slowly ponder over it. When Lei Qiuxing understood, no matter what order he gave as his subjects, they had no choice but to carry it out unconditionally. Chapter 448. Li Zhongxing's mental state had changed. Zhang Xiu and Lei Qiuxing's comments. Li Zhong wasn't informed of these two major events that would affect the future situation in time. At this moment, Li Zhong had already arrived at Taicang City with 100,000 guards. He was wearing a golden armor with a red cloak on his back. At this moment, Li Zhong was riding on a tall horse. No one would be able to tell that he was a scholar who excelled in both politics and strategy. Instead, he looked more like an experienced general who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Taicang City's position in the northern frontier was definitely very special. This was because the climate here wasn't bitter, and the temperature didn't change much. The surrounding land was also very fertile, and it had always been the northern frontier's main source of food. At the same time, it was also the northern frontier's largest warehouse. For example, The phase that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't in a hurry to sell were all stored in Taitsong City's official warehouse. Although the other gathering places had granaries, they were only enough for temporary disaster relief. Most of the food was still stored in Taitsong City. The Northern Frontier's aristocratic family's rebellion wasn't considered brilliant, but it was definitely a wise move to take Taitsong City hostage. This was because if something went wrong with Taitsong City's storage, the entire Northern Frontier would be affected. After all, the various official warehouses were only enough for the local people to eat for half a month. Once Taitsong City's food couldn't be transferred out, they could only use the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to buy large amounts of food from the other 6 empires. However, such a large-scale purchase of rations would undoubtedly make those with keen senses sniff out an opportunity. Perhaps when the time came for these rations to arrive, countless scavengers would come tearing at them with their fangs. It was also because of Taitsong City's importance that Li Zhong's first stop was Taitsong City after he led his troops out. However, he didn't expect to see a pre-built military camp outside the city. Soon, Luo Su, who was covered in bandages and wearing a flying fish robe, walked out of the military camp with a smile. He said in a deep voice, "I didn't expect His Highness to personally lead the troops to reinforce us. Please excuse me for not going out to meet you." The words were polite, but when Luo Su said it, there was more or less a hint of ridicule. After all, it was a big taboo for the king of the Northern Frontier to leave Shunning City with his subordinates. Although there was no explicit rule, this rule had become an unspoken rule in most people's minds after Hu Yen, the king of the Northern Frontier who was almost a puppet. Therefore, Li Zhong should be overseeing the Northern Frontier at the moment, and not taking the risk to personally come to the Northern Frontier, not to mention running into an acquaintance like Luo Su. In an instant, the atmosphere had become extremely awkward. What was even more awkward was that Luo Su, as the commander-in-chief of the Genie Guards, had the power to supervise hundreds of officials. If the Shenwu dynasty had the final say in the Northern Frontier, then Li Zhong's behavior would be regarded as overstepping his bounds, and Luo Su had no right to punish him. However, the Northern Frontier was under Lin Yuan's control. Li Zhong's behavior was tantamount to running into Luo Su's hands. It was really too much of a coincidence. After all, although the king of the Northern Frontier had the title of king, the real ruler of the Northern Frontier was Lin Yuan. Therefore, even if the king of the Northern Frontier got rid of the title of puppet in Li Zhong's hands, he was still only the head of hundreds of officials, far from the real king. Li Zhong waved his sleeves lightly and said coldly, "Commander-in-Chief, don't tell me you're not waiting for me in Taitsong City? After all, you and I both know what that person wants. Wouldn't it save you a lot of trouble if I delivered myself to your door?" Lin Yuan wanted the only authority in the Northern Frontier to be the new law of the Northern Frontier. Therefore, even if there was a king above, he had to make a huge change of the king under the law. Li Zhong was promoted to the position of the king of the Northern Frontier, and he was originally responsible for this. Naturally, he wouldn't pretend to be innocent and try to get rid of the blame. However, being ridiculed by Luo Su in front of his face like this, Li Zhong felt a little embarrassed. "Don't beat around the bush. What's the situation?" Li Zhong saw Luo Su open his mouth, and before he could speak, he took the initiative to interrupt Luo Su. Luo Su was silent for a moment and didn't argue anymore. He turned around and pointed in the direction of Taitsong City, and said coldly, "They've set up barricades and other traps and obstacles at all the entrances and exits of the streets. It's impossible to force our way through. Moreover, almost all of the houses on both sides are private soldiers of the Northern Frontier aristocratic families. If we can't deal with them, we'll lose more than 30% of our people before we reach the barricades." Although the city walls of the Northern Frontier cities had been removed, this didn't mean that the cities on the Northern Frontier were easy to attack. Since ancient times, whether it was attacking or defending, attacking the city walls was often only the first stage. The last stage, which was also the bloodiest stage, was that after breaking through the siege, they still had to enter the city to search for the remaining soldiers and defeated generals. This was the so-called street battle. This kind of battle mode where the advantage in numbers couldn't be fully utilized and could only be fought at close range was like a huge meat grinder. It was crueler than any other kind of battle, because once you entered the street battle and encountered the enemy, you would be surrounded by people in front and behind you. You couldn't run even if you wanted to, so you could only grit your teeth and fight. If your injuries were too serious, the only outcome was to fall in a dark alley and wait for death. Li Zhong's eyes narrowed slightly, and his mind spun quickly. After a moment, a bitter smile appeared on his face. The Northern Frontier Prince's mansion had the advantage. At least in terms of the number of soldiers and the degree of the elites, the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion had completely defeated the aristocratic families of the Northern Frontier. But after entering the street battle, the advantage in numbers didn't have much of an effect. If they fought well, they would only be able to exchange 1 for 1, or 1 for 2. But if the two sides pulled their horses to the wilderness and arranged their soldiers in formations, they would be able to defeat the aristocratic family's private soldiers without much effort. But the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion didn't have an absolute advantage. For example, the Taitsong granary was still in the hands of the aristocratic families of the Northern Frontier. Every entrance and exit of the streets had been set up with traps and obstacles, and a large number of aristocratic families' private soldiers were hidden in the houses. The other side was building a temporary position comparable to a tortoise shell. No matter what method Li Zhong used, the possibility of the other side giving up their advantage and coming out to fight in the field was not high. What do you think? Li Zhong couldn't come up with any ideas at the moment, so he could only look at Luo Su. Although this person usually did things by hook or by crook and had a reckless personality, when faced with such a cowardly opponent, Luo Su's method might be much better than those in military books. Luo Su shrugged and said helplessly, "If you want me to take command, I will transfer a batch of siege weapons, load them with flint, and bombard the defensive area they built. I don't believe they can still hold on." Nonsense. Li Zhong frowned and scolded in a low voice when he heard this. Chapter 449. Heh! Luo Su's expression changed as he continued with a look of disdain. "You were still in school when I was leading the army. Now, all the construction projects in the Northern Frontier are going on at the same time. Here, being a civilian makes more money than being a soldier, and it's also a lot safer. And yet, Lord Dragon King forbade us from forcibly conscripting soldiers. How are you going to defend the Northern Frontier if you lose the people you have? Are you going to count on those monsters? If this is an enemy's camp, then you're right." Li Zhong looked at Luo Su and shook his head gently, saying in a deep voice, "But this is Taitsong. Other than the rebellious clans, there are also millions of civilians. I don't know if the defense line built by the clans at the Northern Frontier will collapse if you continue to bombard it, but the image of the Northern Frontier Lord's residence as a benevolent ruler will definitely crumble." Luo Su waved his hand in disgust and walked toward the camp. Although he did not have any bad feelings toward Li Zhong, as the former commander of the garrison army in mountain-blocking city, he knew very well that all the mercy he showed during the war would only bring pain to himself. Back when they were fighting against the demon beasts, they had to give up countless of their fellow soldiers and brothers in order to stabilize the front line. But now, they were fighting against a group of beasts in human skin. Why should they be so restrained? If it were not for the fact that the siege weapons in the Northern Frontier were all under the control of the Northern Frontier Lord's residence, and that no one was allowed to use them without the letter and seal of the Northern Frontier Lord, Luo Su felt that he would have taken Taitsong City a long time ago. There must be a way. There must be a way. Li Zhong looked at Luo Su's back as he walked further and further away. He slowly closed his eyes and began to recall the topographic map of the entire Taitsong City. While he directly rejected Luo Su's idea of using siege weapons to bombard Taitsong City, that did not mean that he was going to grit his teeth and let his men build a path into the city with blood and flesh. Li Zhong opened his eyes all of a sudden after a while and bellowed, "All cultivators above level 8 of the airborne realm are to report to me right now. We will begin attacking the enemy forces in Taitsong City in an hour." As soon as Li Zhong finished speaking, the two guards beside him quickly ran off. One of them ran towards the flag officer of the Royal Guards, while the other ran towards the camp that the Imperial Guards and the Northern Battlefront Army had set up beforehand. An hour later, one by one, the soldiers who had changed into Black Knight clothes, with short swords and crossbows on their waists, walked out of the camp in a single file. Their Zhan Qi circulated in their bodies, and within a few moments, they had already approached Taitsong City. However, the private soldiers of the clans who were ready to go were surprised to find that those men in black, who were at least at level 8 of the airborne realm, were not there to clear the way for the rest of the troops. They jumped onto the roofs of the houses as soon as they entered Taitsong City. The private soldiers of the clans who were hiding in the houses on both sides of the street were dumbfounded right away. There was no way they were going to poke the roofs with their weapons. If the roofs were to collapse, Wouldn't they be the ones to suffer? However, the clans were not all good-for-nothings. Seeing that someone had bypassed the street battlefield that they had prepared, they immediately pulled the reserve troops up and began to distribute arrows to shoot at those men in black, who did not play by the rules. However, they did not get much out of it. After all, the enemy was a cultivator at the late stage of the airborne realm. Be it in terms of strength or speed, those mortal evolution state soldiers were no match for them. After a round of arrow rain, they did not get anything out of it other than causing some scratches to the few men in black at the front. On the other hand, the men in black took out their crossbows and fired at them in unison, taking out 700 to 800 lives in the blink of an eye. Idiots, find cover and reload. Keep shooting. You must, an aristocratic family's patriarch angrily commanded his family's private army, but before he could finish speaking, a whistling crossbow arrow fiercely nailed into his forehead. For a moment, all the clan lords were silent out of fear. They stared at the black-robed men on the rooftops with burning eyes. However, no one dared to jump out and command their troops. They could only tacitly agree that they would follow the original plan. After all, that crossbow arrow wasn't a stray arrow. It was aimed at their command point. A clan leader wearing a gray robe stood behind a wall and said loudly, "I know what they are going to do. The battlefield now is the street battle that we have chosen. With the quality of the Northern Frontier's army, although they can win against us in a street battle, they definitely won't be willing to suffer such a loss. These men in black are going to mobilize our army and make us fight them in open terrain." A burly patriarch of an aristocratic family spat on the ground and said coldly, "F***ck your mother's fart. I will stay here and not move. See if their main force can come in. Do you think they can fool us with this kind of trick?" "I'm afraid you have no choice but to move even if you don't want to." An old man who looked to be in his 60s or 70s sighed. "Look at the movements of these men in black. Where do you think they are going?" "The granary," the burly clan leader exclaimed. His face suddenly became gloomy. Because of the special geography of the northern frontier, it was not only the Shenwu dynasty that fought against the evil beasts, but also these aristocratic families. After all, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier, who mainly relied on the materials of the evil beasts to make a living, were definitely more hated by the evil beasts than the Castellan's mansion. Therefore, these aristocratic families were not unfamiliar with leading troops to battle. Otherwise, they would not have been able to see through Li Zhong's intentions so quickly. After all, the reason why Taicang City dared to turn their camp into a turtle shell and drag the Northern Region Lord's Palace's army into a street fight was because they had Taicang City's granary in their hands. The Northern Region Lord's Palace could surround Pingwang and Anmin City without attacking to minimize their losses. However, Taicang City was determined to win because most of the Northern Region's food was stored in Taicang City. The people who were trapped in Taicang City weren't afraid of running out of food. However, if the Northern Region Lord's Palace didn't have any food to eat, it would be a disaster. As the hope of the entire northern region, although Taicang Granary was built in the eastern city district, it was surrounded by empty land for tens of thousands of miles. Only near the granary were there 100 or so houses for the gods on duty to guard the granary. Moreover, they were all one-story houses with a small area. Standing at the door, one could see what these houses were like. Although such a place was inside the city, it was more than enough to be used as a battlefield. Once in such an open place, how could these mortal evolution state aristocratic families' private soldiers fight against the Northern Frontier Army? Chapter 450. Why don't we invite those clans over? A clan lord with a curly beard looked around and asked with a grim look on his face. To put it bluntly, the aristocratic families gathered in the outer city were almost the weakest in the entire northern region. They were placed there to serve as cannon fodder and stop the regular army of the Lord of the Northern Region. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been helpless against a group of men in black who were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. They had no choice but to cover their heads and hide behind cover. "I don't think they have the time." The clan lord in a grey robe shook his head gently and sighed. That Li Zhong or whatever has set up a government office in name only, and the manpower of the local government has increased by more than 3 times. Those clans have a hard time suppressing the local government, the Association of the Demon Emperor, and the embroidered uniform guards. Even if we go to them, we might not be able to get them to do anything. Otherwise what? The burly clan lord smirked and said coldly, You don't want us to do it ourselves, do you? The clan lord in a grey robe rolled his eyes twice and sneered. I think you're not very smart, but you're not stupid either. Think about it, if the clans of the Northern Frontier and the Northern Frontier were to fight, who would have a better chance of winning? This is especially true for all of you here. None of you are considered top-notch figures among the clans of the Northern Frontier. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been reduced to being cannon fodder with me. Although I have the name of a clan, I only have a few dozen acres of land under my name, and the annual harvest I get is not even as good as what I get when I go on a trip to the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce with the big caravans. Now, those clans can't take this lying down. They don't want the Northern Frontier to take their thousands of acres of land, so they encourage us to rebel and then leave us here to die. This is not right. As soon as he finished speaking, the clan lords of the smaller clans began to whisper. As the old saying goes, the ass decides the head. If those present were all clan heads of large aristocratic families, they would consider that their farmlands could be used to raise private soldiers. In times of chaos, it was not impossible for them to encircle a piece of land and wait for the imperial court to enlist them. However, those present today were almost all clan heads of small aristocratic families, who were used as cannon fodder by large aristocratic families. The income they earned from farmlands was only enough to feed a family of 100 people. They could not afford to raise a large-scale private army, not to mention encircling a piece of land during the chaos. Therefore, the reason why the aristocratic families were rebelling was not attractive to them at all. The reason why they were here was because they were threatened by the aristocratic families. Otherwise, who would be willing to be cannon fodder? That may be the case, but do you have any other ideas? The burly family head sneered and said in a strange tone, We are rebelling right now. Have you ever seen a king who can tolerate his subordinates rebelling before surrendering? Humans were strange creatures. There were times when they were very assertive and would not listen to anyone's advice. But there were also times when they did not have their own opinions at all. They were so easily swayed that they would believe whatever others said. Those present were all clan heads of the small family. When they heard the grey-robed family head's words, they felt that they did not want to rebel. Wasn't it not worth it to give up their lives for the sake of the aristocratic families? But when they heard the burly family head's words, they felt that the possibility of them surrendering was not high. After all, Lei Fan and Hu Yen were considered to be the old generals by the Black Jiao's side. Wasn't it because they had violated these taboos and were kicked out just like that? They were now standing on the side of the rebels. Seeing that they could not defeat the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion, they were going to surrender. Even if Li Zhong was willing to take them under his command now, when the trouble at hand was settled, would Li Zhong still have a reason to let them go? If all of you were to go out and surrender just like that, you will not be able to escape death. But now is such a good opportunity. If you can release the power of the various government offices and assist the regular army outside the city to take down Taizong, it will be a great merit. If we have such merit in our hands, even if Li Zhong wants our lives, he will have to first ask for Lord Dragon King's permission. The grey-robed family head's lips curled up slightly and he said with a cold smile, Lord Dragon King has no intention of completely annihilating us aristocratic families. If we are all exterminated, who is going to help the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to do business in the south? It is all those aristocratic families who are not willing to let Lord Dragon King take away their land, and that is why they have joined forces to create such a ruckus. Instead, they have put us in a difficult position. Among the aristocratic families in the northern frontier, there were the Chao family who clenched their teeth and stuck with Lin Yuan. There were also the large aristocratic families who clenched their teeth and wanted to fight to the death with the northern frontier prince's mansion. But there were not many family heads who had the courage to bet the lives of their entire family on this battle. Most of them were like this grey-robed family head, planning to stay for a while and see the situation before deciding which side to stand on. This method seemed to have a high chance of success. At least they could bet their chips on the winner. But everyone knew that once they were in this quagmire, it would be difficult to get out. If they did not have enough merit and sincerity, even if they bet correctly, they would be punished by Li Zhong one by one. Because if they put themselves in his shoes, if they were sitting on the throne of the northern frontier prince, they would not want the aristocratic families to once again become a big threat to the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. Any existence that did not wholeheartedly submit to them had to be eliminated as soon as possible. You tell us first, what should we do? If your plan is good, I can bet with you. If we bet correctly this time, The good days that belong to us in the northern frontier will arrive. The burly family head licked his lips. It was obvious that the gray-robed family head's suggestion was extremely tempting to him. The gray-robed family head crossed his arms in front of his chest. With an unfathomable smile on his face, he said, "First of all, we will let these black-robed men go directly to the granary. Then we will split into two groups. One group will go outside and beg for surrender. At the same time, we will explain our intentions and let them send some experts to infiltrate into our group. After that, we will go to the various government offices and say that the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion has gathered experts and we are unable to stop them. They are already heading in the direction of the granary. When the time comes." Before the gray-robed family head could finish his words, the bearded family head interrupted him and asked, "It's easy for you to say. Don't you know what the big aristocratic families are like? They are already unable to suppress the power of the various government offices in Taitsong City. Originally, they planned to rely on us to delay the army of the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion for a period of time, so that they can gradually eat away at the people in the government offices. Good fellow, you just accepted the battle and directly reported that you are unable to defeat them. Do you think they will let us go?" Chapter 451. Why are you so noisy? Don't tell me you're scared? The gray-robed family master coldly sized up the curled-bearded family master and sneered. "Now that the situation is like this, if we don't want to be cannon fodder, we must hug the thighs of the Northern Frontier Wong Fu. If we want to hug the thighs of the Northern Frontier Wong Fu, the only way is to completely offend the Northern Frontier aristocratic families. For someone like you who doesn't do anything and just wants to watch them fight, you can just wait to be settled." Speaking up to this point, the gray-robed family master pointed at the surrounding family masters and said with a cold face, "I don't have any other intentions. I just want to find a way out for my brothers and instantly take revenge on those aristocratic families who used us as cannon fodder. If you guys aren't willing, fine. Let's have a fight first so that we won't drag anyone down." As his voice fell, the surrounding area was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. After all, even though they were members of the Northern Frontier aristocratic families, they were at the lowest level. Not to mention that the Northern Frontier Wong Fu could directly crush the so-called Northern Frontier aristocratic families in terms of strength. Even if both sides were evenly matched, they still hoped that the Wong Fu would win. After all, as long as Lin Yuan existed in the Northern Frontier, they would be able to reap huge benefits from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. And if the aristocratic families controlled the Northern Frontier, it would only cause these small and medium-sized aristocratic families to gradually fall apart. Furthermore, at this point in time, even if there were really stubborn people who thought that this matter was related to the survival of the Northern Frontier aristocratic families, they would have to reconsider. No one was willing to die, and there weren't many people who were noble enough to be willing to die for others. Whoever interrupts again, I'll twist his neck off. The burly family master swept a glance at the surrounding people who were silent like cicadas in winter. He smiled at the gray-robed family master and said, "Brother, I'll do whatever you say." "You didn't finish your words just now. What do you want us to do after we report this to the yamen?" "Humph." The gray-robed family's lord coldly snorted. A cold light flickered in his eyes as he indifferently said, "They'll send some of their experts to the front line with us after we've delivered the message. They'll try to snipe those black-robed men's steps. Those who've gone to the yamen are bound to have a quarrel with them. Now is the time when they need people. They won't kill anyone. However, they'll certainly say some unpleasant words. So, take advantage of this gap. Those who've gone out to beg for surrender must hurry up and inform the other side of my plan." 15 minutes later. After receiving the message from his subordinate, Li Zhong stroked his chin and sneered. He had made a special trip to suppress the Northern Frontier aristocratic families. He didn't expect that the aristocratic families would have internal strife even before the official start. He just wanted to lead people to the granary to change the terrain to a more open battlefield suitable for them to fight. Let Luo Su send some embroidered uniform guards who are good at hiding their breath to go back with them. Also, let those people in front stop the attack, lest those people come out and think that the family masters of those small aristocratic families are deceiving them. But, it's okay to go easy on them, but too much will seem fake. Let them know what to do. Li Zhong sat in the commander's tent and slowly read out his order. Luo Su nodded repeatedly, as if he had thought of something. Li Zhong waved his hand and dismissed the messenger in front of him. Only then did his eyes fall on Luo Su, waiting for him to continue. I always thought that although the Dragon King's methods were extraordinary, compared to the real heroes, he was still a little lacking. Because every time the Dragon King's chess piece was placed, he was always ready to use force to get the situation back on track when it was out of his control. But today, before we even entered Taicang City, the big aristocratic families and the small aristocratic families were forced into conflict because of us. Only now did I understand why the Dragon King wanted me to pay attention to these 3 cities. Almost all the big aristocratic families have countless fertile fields. For the sake of their family's future, it's normal for them to fall out with us. But the small aristocratic families obviously don't have such benefits. They will only stand on the opposite side of us, purely under the coercion of the big aristocratic families. If they can gain the upper hand, it's fine. But once they are forced into a desperate situation, their past dirty deeds will be exposed. Of course, the aristocratic families have offended the Dragon King's reverse scale. But at this point, they still know to atone for their sins by using the heads of the big aristocratic families in exchange for their own survival. Whether it's these quick-witted talents or the small but prosperous families behind them, for us, it's all beneficial. Luo Su's eyes narrowed slightly, and he smiled. More importantly, keeping these small aristocratic families for our use is tantamount to setting an example for the small aristocratic families outside. If the aristocratic families outside have a conflict with us, after this chaos, we only need to see how carefree and comfortable these small aristocratic families in the northern frontier are, and they won't stand on the wrong side again. Your flattery is not bad. It's a pity that the Dragon King isn't here. Li Zhong choked on Luo Su's words, and then said indifferently, "This is a job that can lead to death. As the commander-in-chief of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, don't you plan to say a few words to the selected Embroidered Uniform Guard?" Luo Su spread out his hands indifferently and said indifferently, "What's there to say? It's not like you don't know the Embroidered Uniform Guard's initial criteria for recruiting spies. The most basic point is that you can't take your life seriously. You have to have the ability to lie flat on the ground and not get up even if the wheels of a speeding carriage are a centimeter away from your head. Only then can you be selected to serve in the Embroidered Uniform Guard." This. Li Zhong looked at Luo Su with a blank face. He didn't expect that the first batch of people recruited by the Embroidered Uniform Guard would all be lunatics who didn't take their lives seriously. Yes, although these people usually looked normal, if a person could disregard life and death and still roll around in the world of mortals for fame and fortune, then that person was 100% a lunatic. Luo Su drank the tea in his cup in one gulp and said with a smile, "It's just a test of courage. You haven't seen the training courses of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. If a normal person doesn't have this kind of courage, after half a month of training, they'll either become a lunatic or a fool. What's more, the Embroidered Uniform Guard's work isn't clean. Whatever the higher-ups want, we have to ask. Even the slightest bit won't do. When faced with those stubborn people, we can only use torture. Tell me, if a person doesn't take his own life seriously, would he take the lives of others seriously?" Li Zhong subconsciously shivered. Although he knew that Luo Su was referring to the first generation of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, with such a group of perverted seniors, he could already see a corner of how difficult the days of the youths who would fill in the positions of the Embroidered Uniform Guard would be. Chapter 452. D*it. Are you all F*king useless? A family leader whose face was flushed red grabbed the collar of the gray-robed family leader and said coldly, "We all left our private soldiers stationed in the outer city, and we didn't let you idiots personally go into battle. You can't even command the battle well? Even if you use your life, can't you stop those black-clothed people for a while?" The gray-robed family leader's face was smeared with mud, and he looked battered and exhausted. He smiled bitterly and said, "Boss Lin, it's not that we didn't try our best." Thousands of black-clothed people came out together, and all of them were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. Not to mention those private soldiers who were used as cannon fodder. Even if we went up personally, we wouldn't be able to withstand a round of their charge. The original Northern Frontier private soldiers were not much different from the regular army because at that time, whether it was the City Lord's office or the Northern Frontier families, they did not have much money and food to feed the army. However, after Lin Yuan established the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, The money and food invested in the construction of the regular army was not on the same level as the aristocratic families. In addition to a large number of spiritual items, after Li Zhong and Luo Su joined forces, about 150,000 troops were almost all at the airborne realm. Even if they were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm and above, they had directly gathered tens of thousands of people. On the other hand, the quality of the family's private soldiers was somewhat unsightly. Even airborne realm warriors were able to stand on equal footing with these small clans, let alone late-stage airborne realm warriors. Furthermore, all of them were in the ranks of the main clans, which meant that they were not people that these small clan leaders could command. However, the combat prowess of both sides was there for all to see. Airborne realm warriors were able to hover in the air for a short period of time, and they could even use the air to jump. While they were traveling on the roof, the mortal evolution warriors below had to think of ways to build ladders to climb up. By the time they made it up, those people on the roof were nowhere to be seen. Even if they were able to catch the enemy's follow-up forces, it was hard to say whether they were lucky or unlucky. After all, they were fighting on a narrow roof, and they also had to consider the roof's load-bearing capacity. Usually, it would be 10 or so mortal evolution states fighting 7 or 8 airborne states. In comparison, they had no chance of winning at all. Of course, although the gray-robed clan leader knew that the enemy had at least 8,000, if not 10,000 late-stage airborne realm cultivators, when he went to the Yamen to ask for help, he could only say a number that was not too exaggerated. Otherwise, he would have directly said that there were 10,000 late-stage airborne realm cultivators. At that time, the enemy would not think about how to continue to consolidate the defense line, but would instead think about running for their lives. Again, the aristocratic family's private soldiers could fight in the streets, and they could also use the street battles to buy enough time for the northern frontier to fall into chaos, or wait for the other two backup plans to take effect. But if they were asked to gather their men and horses to fight against the northern frontier's regular army, they obviously didn't have the guts to do so. Thousands of advanced airborne realm cultivators? Only then did the complexion of the clan's master, whose face was flushed red, clear up a little. He loosened the collar of the clan's master and said in a deep voice, "Then what's the meaning of you coming here? Don't tell me that you're going to ask me to send people to support you. It took a lot of effort for me to be able to suppress these lunatics in the Yamen. If I were to send more people away, the entire line of defense might collapse." They naturally knew how the battle of the cannon fodder outside was. Not to mention thousands of advanced airborne realm cultivators, even if there were 200 or 300 of them, they could easily tear their line of defense. Now, the men in black outside had yet to rush in, which was enough to prove that the private soldiers in front were already using their lives to delay the enemy's new advance. Big Brother Lin, I'm not worrying for nothing. These thousands of men in black can be strong, but they can also be weak. If they were to enter the city, they would go straight to the stronghold of the Association of the Demon Emperor or the various Yamens. I'm sure I have nothing to worry about, because the elites of the various clan leaders are gathered here. Even if they were to rush in, they would only end up with their heads bleeding. There's no way they could threaten us at all. At this point, the gray-robed clan's master took a deep breath and pointed in the direction of the eastern city. He asked, "But what if they don't care about the lives of these people in the city and go straight to the granary?" At this time, Big Brother Lin was slightly stunned. He immediately shook his head decisively and cursed, "Bull*T, there are still troops under their command in the city. If they were to rush in, it should be a small force. The main force will still be blocked by the streets. If those little rats that rush in want to do something, they must first liberate these people in the city. If they don't come to save people, it can only mean that there's a traitor among us." At this point, Big Brother Lin reached out and patted the gray-robed clan's master on the shoulder. He sneered and said, "Don't you think so?" The gray-robed clan's master sighed and said in a low voice, "Big Brother Lin, what do you think we're doing? Are we children playing house? We're rebelling. If you're not careful, you can lose your head. How can you be so careless? Do you know who's leading the troops outside the city? One is Li Zhong, who has single-handedly schemed against my aristocratic family, and the other is Luo Su, who has completely exposed the epidemic food plan. With these two fiends together, do you think that we will not become traitors? Do you think there is a way to survive?" Big Brother Lin deliberated for a moment and didn't continue to be entangled in the topic of traitors. The gray-robed clan's master shook his head again and sighed. I originally thought that Hu Yen had suffered a big loss at Li Zhong's hands, which caused our clan to lose the hearts of the people. You arrogant clan's masters would sound the alarm for yourselves and treat Li Zhong as a real opponent. But now, it seems that you haven't learned your lesson and still don't treat Li Zhong seriously, right? Speaking up to hear, he raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the granary and said in a low voice, "The food we're eating now is all transferred from the granary. Although the surrounding clans didn't participate in the operation, they've sent all their private armies over. With so many people eating, how many days does Big Brother Lin think your family's private storehouse can last them?" Big Brother Lin silently calculated for a moment. His eyes revealed a touch of panic and said in a low voice, "If something happens to the granary, our food can only last for 7 days. In terms of time, we're much more urgent than the northern frontier prince's mansion." The gray-robed clan's master nodded heavily and said bitterly, "Now Li Zhong obviously wants to send people to occupy the granary first. Big Brother, if you don't give people here, you won't give people in other places either. If the outer defense line can't hold, I can only let them pass. The battlefield will change from the streets and alleys that we've carefully selected to the tens of thousands of miles of open space near the granary. Big Brother, how many people do you think will have left after one round of assault?" At this point, even if Big Brother Lin has a heart of stone, he has to consider whether he can keep his head. Chapter 453. 30,000 miles away from Taicang City, on the top of a mountain. Ding Zai was wearing a sapphire blue robe with a wide belt with red spider patterns around his waist. His long hair hung down to his waist. Although Ding Zai didn't look much different from before in terms of facial features, his temperament was completely different. It was as if he was a different person. The aura around him flowed with a faint sound of wind and thunder. It seems that our demon emperor is sure to win. Ding Zai looked at the coiled-up black Jiao in front of him. A faint smile appeared on his face as he took the initiative to break the silence. Lin Yuan slowly turned his head. There was no color in his different-colored eyes. He said indifferently, "If there is no problem on your side, this king won't lose." With such a huge gap, the only winning hand for the northern frontier clans is Kong Lezin. Other than that, any other path is a dead end. Otherwise, I can continue to suppress the northern frontier. Why should I give up this stage for them to fight? Heh. Ding Zai laughed dryly and said in a deep voice, "Unfortunately, Lord Demon Emperor overestimated himself, and similarly overestimated me. I came all the way to the Upper Deer Association, and didn't even meet a decent expert." Whoosh! With a sharp sound of wind breaking, Lin Yuan, who was coiled up in front of Ding Zai, suddenly appeared in front of him. The two looked at each other for a while. Lin Yuan slowly opened his mouth and sneered, "Is your Upper Deer Association still playing tricks? If you can't do what I ask, you will definitely not return to the northern frontier to die." As the sound of his voice faded, an incomparably majestic aura gushed out from his body. The might that belonged to the dragon race was like a mountain that could suppress the world, ruthlessly crushing down on Ding Zai. Under the pressure of Lin Yuan's terrifying aura, Ding Zai took a few steps back. He took a deep breath and said with a red face, "Since Demon Emperor knows about the Heaven Gate, then you should know that for us, any combat power is very precious. The higher-ups feel that you have the potential to become one of them in the future, so they are willing to make peace for you. However, Kong Lezin is now one of those people. They naturally won't send experts to kill Kong Lezin for you." As the sound of his voice faded, Lin Yuan's dragon might still didn't have the slightest intention of restraining it. It pressed down on Ding Zai's body inch by inch, as if wanting to crush him into meat paste. "Kong Lezin will soon withdraw from the northern frontier. This is what you should have thought of before we set off." Ding Zai's face was flushed red, his chest was heaving up and down violently, but the amount of oxygen he could breathe in was very little. Only now did he realize that this black Jiao was unbelievably strong. Beast Kings at the Mountain Lord level weren't rare, but Ding Zai had never seen a Beast King at the Mountain Lord level who could give him such a strong sense of pressure like Lin Yuan. "Yes, I did think of it. So, from the beginning, I didn't count on your Upper Deer Association." Lin Yuan's suppression on Ding Zai loosened slightly. A faint smile flashed across his different-colored eyes as he continued, "I just want you and Kong Lezin to think that I have placed my hopes on your Upper Deer Association. What did you do? Lunatic. Ding Zai looked at Lin Yuan with a dumbfounded expression. His face even started to distort. Lin Yuan condescendingly looked at Ding Zai, whose face was distorted, and said word by word, I just want to tell all of you, from today onwards, whoever stretches their claws towards me, I will dare to chop off their claws. What happened to the Fire Kirin back then will be what happened to Kong Lezin today. Kong Lezin was the guardian of the Heaven Gate. No matter what position he had among those top bosses, he was extremely rare in this circle where combat strength was scarce. If Lin Yuan wanted to resolve this matter through peaceful diplomacy, then the best result would be for him to cause a storm in the northern frontier and almost overturn the entire northern frontier. Then, he would leave as if nothing had happened. If Kong Lezin could do this today, it would be the same if someone else came tomorrow. At least before Lin Yuan grew to their level, there would not be the slightest change. As long as there was a conflict between the two sides, the one who would suffer in the end would definitely be Lin Yuan. And to put it bluntly, the Sky Martial continent could be said to be extremely afraid of the things on the other side of the Heaven Gate. They were strictly guarding it and were not willing to let anything from outside the Heaven Gate enter the Sky Martial continent. This kind of abnormal defense had been maintained since ancient times until now. Even in the current cultivation world, the Void Realm was already the ceiling. To put it nicely, it was called being cautious. To put it bluntly, these people were just scared by some bad things on the other side. But they had completely forgotten that the cultivation techniques they were practicing today also came from the other side of the Heaven Gate. Lin Yuan did not have any fear of the other side of the Heaven Gate. Whether it was a psychological effect or not, or what he had seen and heard after coming to this world, Lin Yuan was at least 60% sure that even if the other side of the Heaven Gate was not the world he was familiar with, it should be a similar world. As long as he could find the way, sooner or later he would be able to return to his original world and put down all the blood feud. You can't do that. Ding Zai looked at Lin Yuan with a twisted face and growled, I don't care what method you use, but you have to know that Kong Lezin is a member of the Heaven Gate's guardian. He is an indispensable fighting force of our Sky Martial continent. If you kill him, no one will be able to save you, this daring demonic beast. Lin Yuan raised his eyelids slightly and said casually, Since I have the ability to kill Kong Lezin, I have the ability to kill others. Do you think those almighty experts above Kong Lezin are the same as him and can walk away casually? Or is it that they can send several existences on the level of Kong Lezin at once? Ding Zai was silent. Obviously he did not know how to refute Lin Yuan's words. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes, and he sneered, All your madness now is telling me that the Sky Martial continent cannot afford the loss of one Kong Lezin, but I can tell you that today, Kong Lezin will definitely die. After he dies, no one will touch me, and there will be people rushing to curry favor with me. Because in the future, this king is destined to go to the Heaven Gate, and is destined to stand at a higher place than Kong Lezin. With one Kong Lezin dead, only the four alliance behind him will feel a little heartache. You talk to this king about the big picture, and this king will also talk to you about the big picture. How about it? Chapter 454. Lin Yuan, tell me what you want. As long as you let go of Kong Lezin, we, the Upper Deer Association, will do our best to satisfy you. Ding Zai swallowed a mouthful of saliva and shook his head as if he had accepted his fate. He said bitterly, The higher-ups told me that we must bring honored one Kong Le back to Heaven's Gate safely because there are strange movements at Heaven's Gate again. This time, no one knows what will appear. Any battle power is precious to us. He can't die here, he really can't. There were no small matters in Heaven's Gate. Even a little bit of gossip was enough to shake the entire Tianwu continent. Moreover, there were indeed strange movements at Heaven's Gate this time. According to past experience, Heaven's Gate was likely to open again. No one could say for sure what would come out of Heaven's Gate this time and what its attitude would be towards them. If someone else was standing here, Ding Zai might sneer at them for overestimating themselves. Although Kong Lezin was not a top figure, he was not an existence that any Tom, Dick, and Harry could deal with. However, the person who threatened him was Lin Yuan, an existence that was linked to miracles since his birth. In a year and a half, he had turned from a small black snake into the current Black Jiao in the north. His speed of advancement was even more terrifying than Yang Qinglin, who had used a secret technique to reincarnate. Since his birth, he had won every battle. Fighting enemies above his level was as easy as eating and drinking. Moreover, he had single-handedly turned the bitter cold northern frontier into the current paradise. Even people with discerning eyes could see that as long as the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce existed, the North would become the absolute core of the entire Shinwu dynasty in the future. In his eyes, the sects and aristocratic families that caused headaches to the royal families of the 7 great empires were like chickens and dogs that could be destroyed with a flip of his hand. He was clearly a demonic beast, but he had opened up a new territory and occupied the territory of humans. However, the 7 great empires had pinched their noses and accepted this matter. The Shinwu dynasty had suppressed their displeasure and conferred Lin Yuan the title of a god in the northern frontier. Moreover, under Lin Yuan's influence, 3 successive kings of the northern frontier were changed. Even if some people thought that once the Shinwu dynasty regained its peace, Lin Yuan would be in trouble. But everyone knew that it was impossible. Unless the Shinwu dynasty was willing to give up the vast majority of its tax revenue and wanted to eliminate the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce after losing the southern maritime trade, if it really came to that step, even if the Shinwu dynasty was very peaceful on the surface, in fact, it was only one step away from being destroyed. Therefore, the position of the northern frontier and Lin Yuan in the Shinwu dynasty in the future was absolutely unique. In other words, Lin Yuan had created too many miracles. Even he himself was a huge miracle. Upper Deer Association? It seems that you have never fulfilled the promise you made. The coldness in Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes turned and was replaced with ridicule and ridicule. He said in a deep voice, "I asked you to bring an expert who can contend with Kong Lezin. In the end, you went out and came back to tell me that you wanted to take Kong Lezin away, and this matter is over. Then I want to ask you, if it weren't for the quick reaction of my people, those infected food would have entered the warehouse of the northern frontier. Can you solve it? The construction of a series of projects in the northern frontier has been stalled. Can you solve it?" Ding Zai reached out to touch the cold sweat on his nose and looked at Lin Yuan with trepidation. After a long while, Ding Zai sighed and said, "You have to know whether it is the northern frontier or me. Our lives are not worth mentioning in the eyes of those above. Unless it is someone like you, who has the qualifications to become the guardian of the heavenly gate. Only then will they have some weight in their eyes. The rest are trivial matters, or even not a matter." Speaking of this, Ding Zai raised his head and looked at the ridicule in Lin Yuan's eyes. He lowered his head again and said, "You are right. In the big picture, even if you kill Kong Lezin, they will not take your life. Instead, they will give you a large amount of resources for your cultivation, so that you can replace Kong Lezin's position as the guardian of the heavenly gate as soon as possible. But..." Ding Zai paused again. Seeing Lin Yuan's contemplative look, he continued, "They will make us, their lackeys, join forces to destroy the northern frontier. They will make all your efforts go to waste, and they will kill all the people who are on good terms with you. This is their punishment. You did not listen to their opinions and insisted on killing Kong Lezin." Speaking of this, Ding Zai carefully raised his head. Seeing Lin Yuan's eyes showing hesitation, he suppressed the joy in his heart. He cupped his hands in greeting to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, "And we, whether in your eyes or in their eyes, are all ant-like existences not worth mentioning. The orders from above, we have to carry them out unconditionally." "Are you threatening this king?" Lin Yuan still maintained a condescending posture, but the dragon's might on his body was slowly withdrawn. Ding Zai shook his head and said respectfully, "I don't dare. I just hope that you will think about it carefully. Is it more important to vent your anger, or to maintain the current situation and mind your own business with the people above?" Lin Yuan pondered for a moment, then used his dragon tail to break the surrounding trees with some irritation. He roared, "This is the first and last time this king will compromise with them. Take Kong Lezin and get out of the northern frontier as soon as possible. If there is a next time, this king will not give any of you any face. If anyone dares to reach out, this king will definitely chop off their hands." "Yes, yes. Thank you, Demon Emperor, for your mercy." Ding Zai respectfully put his head on the ground and replied with a big smile. For an existence like him, even if his combat strength burst out, in the northern frontier, only Lin Yuan, Yan Xingqi, Yang Qinglin, and Kong Lezin could surpass him. But after being cultivated by the Deer Association since childhood, Ding Zai had long forgotten what his own edge and dignity were. As long as he could achieve his goal, he was willing to do anything and pay any price. Even if the negotiation had reached this point, Ding Zai would still suspect that Lin Yuan was just bluffing and did not have a way to kill Kong Lezin. But he did not dare to gamble, nor did he dare to go against this temperamental Black Jiao, because the one who would suffer in the end would be him. Wait. Lin Yuan stopped Ding Zai, who was just about to get up. Seeing the latter immediately stop and obediently lie on the ground again, he nodded with satisfaction and said, "This king let Kong Lezin go, but it is not without conditions. Since those guys behind you control this world, then, let's change the situation." Chapter 455. Let's not talk about the bargaining between Lin Yuan and Ding Zai. At the same time, in addition to the chaotic battle in Taizong City, no one noticed that a cavalry in bright red armor was like a torrent of steel, waving machetes and lances, rushing toward Shunning City under the cover of the night. They looked very aggressive, like beasts that had just been released from their cages. The most important thing was that these knights in red armor did not wear helmets, and their exposed hairstyles were indescribably strange. They were either bald here or there with braids there. Some of them had braids all over their heads, and some of them were bald. They didn't look like a proper army. Instead, they looked like a group of armored bandits. The smell of blood could be smelled from their bodies even from far away. In a flash, the leading knight in red armor suddenly pulled the reins and raised his right hand to make a gesture. The whole troop suddenly stopped as if time had stopped. The knights on the horses all silently pulled out their machetes and stared at the darkness in front of them. In the darkness, there stood a silent army. The two sides were hundreds of miles apart. Even though the cultivation of the knights in red armor was only one step away from the Heaven Gang realm, they could still barely see the outline of those black armored soldiers. They were all wearing black scales, and their helmets were in the shape of a ferocious tiger's head. There were some words engraved on the left arm armor, but they could not see it clearly in the darkness. The leader of the knights in red armor was very clear that these black-armored soldiers would not be so bored to come here in the middle of the night to play, and they would not be standing on their route. The black machetes in their hands were made of some unknown metal, but they did not reflect a trace of light in the moonlight. This also showed that these black-armored soldiers were standing there silently, waiting for a battle. Barbarians of the Shuangjian dynasty, get out of the northern frontier immediately, or you will die without a complete corpse. The silent black-armored soldiers parted to the sides, and a similarly dressed general rode out from the center of the formation. However, this person did not wear a helmet. Instead, he used a golden crown to tie up his hair, and a black cloak behind his armor. His figure was incomparably tall and sturdy, and he looked like an iron tower. At the same time, torches suddenly lit up in the army of black-armored soldiers, illuminating these silent black-armored soldiers. At the same time, the general's facial features were also illuminated. He had a pair of sharp eagle-like eyebrows, and he was holding a machete upside down. His whole body emitted an extremely strong smell of blood. At this time, the knights in red armor saw two runes engraved on the left shoulder of their opponent in a language that they did not recognize. After a while, they vaguely recognized that it was Black Water. The leader of the blood-armored knights had never heard of the Blackwater army in the north, so he had no idea what was going on in the minds of these fellows who were silently standing in front of them without any torches. The war horses they were riding were the specialties of the Frost dynasty. They were completely different from the war horses of the other 6 dynasties. The war horses of the other 6 dynasties were basically hybrids of demonic beasts and ordinary horses. Although their strength and endurance were not as good as real demonic beasts, they were more docile and could be controlled by those who had a little understanding of horsemanship. Moreover, when facing demonic beasts, the blood of demonic beasts that flowed in their veins would not make them lose their courage and collapse to the ground. However, the horses of the Shuangjian dynasty were not something that those hybrid horses could compare to. The horses they rode were demon beasts. Usually, when they were fed, each horse would eat at least thousands of pounds of raw meat in a day. Otherwise, they would become ferocious and even their masters might be eaten by them. The knights in red armor riding demon beasts had never thought that anything could withstand their charge with just flesh and blood. Even Shen Lin Jun, who was recognized as the most elite soldier in the Shenwu dynasty, had to set up a series of barricades and traps to restrict the cavalry of the Shuangjian dynasty before he dared to fight them. The Black Water Army, who stood on their route without saying a word, was generally known as courting death. Of course, although the cavalry of the Shuangjian dynasty was terrifying, Not all troops were equipped with such horses. For example, an official cavalry troop of the Shuangjian dynasty usually consisted of about 50,000 people. The standard equipment was a set of heavy armor, a lance, a scimitar, a bow, and armor-piercing arrows for knights. Together with 3 horses and 3 sets of heavy horse armor, the Shuangjian dynasty would spend more than 10,000 taels of gold to equip each knight. This was only the fixed cost of equipment. Not to mention the salary and rations of the knights. A single horse would eat at least 500 pounds of raw meat a day. A cavalry troop of 150,000 horses would eat 150 million pounds of raw meat a day. In order to pay for the rations of a cavalry troop, it meant that the cavalry troop would have to hunt at least 20 demon beasts of the Wisdom State or 5 demon beasts of the Mountain Lord State each day. Additionally, they would have to feed a large number of poultry and livestock to the front line. The Shuangjian dynasty was famous for its belligerence and poverty. If they wanted to survive, they had to constantly fight and plunder. Therefore, the people of the Shuangjian dynasty were called barbarians. In the Tianwu continent where the 7 great empires ruled, the reputation of Shuangjian barbarian was even worse than that of demon beasts. They were only a bit better than those evil cultists. The knights of the Shuangjian dynasty were the best in the world. However, they would never have imagined that the Black Water Army in front of them was an existence that was not inferior to them in terms of extravagance. The black scales on their bodies were not ordinary things. Lin Yuan would shed his skin every 2 months. Although the old skin he left behind was not as tough as his body, it was much better than the armor made by the 7 great empires using metal mixed with demon beast bones. However, most of the scales would be damaged during the shedding process, so there were not many that could be used to make armor. In the past 4 months, Lin Yuan had only raised this Black Water Army of 30,000 people. The black sabers in their hands were not made of metal, but the bones of a type of mastiff called Crimson Steel Mastiff. After being polished and improved by craftsmen, they became bone sabers that were as hard as mud. In any case, among the current military armors in the northern frontier, apart from the armor made from Lin Yuan's scales, there was really no armor that could withstand a scratch from these bone sabers. Apart from the preciousness of their equipment, these Black Water Army warriors ate demon beast meat that was at least in the late stage of the Wisdom State every day. Even the water they drank was medicine that was soaked in 100-year-old spiritual items. There was only one word to describe the entire troop: expensive. Chapter 456. We of the Frost Empire will only fight to the death, not run. The leader of the blood-armored cavalry sneered and said coldly, "Since you know who we are, then you should know Shuai Liao's fighting style. Once you start fighting with us, we will fight to the death until there is only one person left. Little kid, are you prepared to die?" The general of the Black Water Army didn't want to waste any more words. He squeezed his horse's belly with his legs, and in pain, the horse charged straight at the Blood Liao cavalry. He slowly raised his gleaming crescent blade. "You overestimate yourself." The leader of the Blood Liao cavalry sneered. "Little kid, remember this well. I am Wanyan de Guang, the 13th prince of the Shuangjian dynasty. You should be honored to die by my hands." In the eyes of the Blood Liao cavalry, this black-armored general's actions were indeed suicidal. This was because the entire Black Water Army was made up of infantrymen. When this general charged, the silent black-armored soldiers also took off their large shields embedded with black scales and charged in their direction. However, it was a taboo for infantrymen to clash with cavalry. The general of the Black Water Army looked like he didn't know what was good for him. He clearly knew that he was the only cavalryman in the entire army, but he still urged his horse forward first. This caused him to be derailed from the battle. Once he was trapped in their battle formation, it wouldn't be so easy to retreat. The two armies hadn't even started fighting yet, but their general had already been killed on the spot. Under such circumstances, even if these silent black-armored soldiers had steel-like willpower, their morale would still be shaken. The black-armored knight charged into the fray alone. He poured his chi into his crescent blade and cut down the scimitars coming at him like he was unstoppable. However, before he could kill the enemy, the Blood Liao cavalry in front of him urged their horses to get out of the way. Although the black-armored knight wanted to pull on the reins, how could he stop his horse at this speed? They had no choice but to plunge headfirst into the depths of the Blood Liao knight's war and fall into a state of isolation and helplessness. This was a tactic that the Shuai Liao cavalry often used to surround and kill generals with extraordinary martial arts. After all, A single person's strength was limited. Unless one's cultivation was at the Void Realm, one could forget about breaking through their formation. After all, the Shuel cavalry was one of the imperial army units of the Shuangjian dynasty, and not just any random person could be selected. Without a certain level of cultivation and background, how could one enter the imperial army? At this moment, the Black Water Army was still about 300 paces away from the Blood Liao Knights. They placed the black-armored knights into the formation, then surrounded the entrance to deal with the black-armored warriors outside. Once the general inside was stunned, they would toss his head out. They didn't believe that the black-armored warriors outside would grit their teeth and continue fighting. In fact, the Blood Liao Knight strategy had been executed perfectly from the moment the black-armored knights were placed into the formation. But when it came to the encirclement, the style suddenly changed. Because the distance was getting closer and closer, the black-armored knights had long since abandoned their crescent scimitars and instead pulled out their black bone scimitars to engage in close combat. Whenever their bone scimitars fell, scimitars would break, horses would fall to the ground, and a Shuel knight would die on the spot. There were even a few unlucky fellows who were cut in half along with their horses. The bone scimitars of the black-armored knights were basically fatal, and if one couldn't dodge in time, they would end up crippled. But when the scimitars of the Blood Liao Knights landed on the black-armored knights, it was a different matter altogether. When the incredibly sharp scimitars landed on the black-scaled armor made of some unknown material, they could only leave faint white marks. Some of the scimitars that were of inferior quality even snapped after drawing sparks, the tips of the scimitars even stabbing into the bodies of their own comrades. What the hell is this? The eyes of the 13th prince, who had been spouting nonsense at the start, nearly popped out of their sockets. Whether it was his scimitars or his cavalry spears, none of them could break through the enemy's defenses. But the enemy was like a tiger in a flock of sheep, killing them with a single scimitar. And at this moment, the black-armored soldiers who couldn't hold their own charged forward. Whether it was the scimitars or the blows of their shields, the outer formation only lasted for a moment before it was completely torn apart. What followed next was a one-sided slaughter. Logically speaking, although the 13th prince wasn't a famous general and couldn't compare to Yan Xingqi or Lei Qiuxing, in terms of military strategy, he definitely had no problem competing with rising stars like Li Zhongxing and Zhang Qilin. If someone had told him in the past that an infantry corps could suppress cavalry despite the disadvantage in numbers, he would have definitely dismissed that person's words as nonsense. Even now, he still didn't know how to command this battle. From the chaotic battle, he could vaguely see that the cavalry were incomparably vicious. When the enemy attacked with a single scimitar, they could often attack with 2 or 3 scimitars in a row. But this was of no use. If one scimitar couldn't break their armor, then 3 scimitars couldn't break their armor. But when the enemy's scimitar came down, both men and horses were wiped out. Of course, the 13th prince wasn't the only one who was paying attention to this battlefield. At the periphery of Shunning City, on a temporary observation tower, Xia Xiyu was observing the battle through a telescope. The corner of his mouth kept rising as he clicked his tongue and said, "Killer weapon, big killer weapon." Also on the observation tower was a projection of Lin Yuan. A pair of different colored eyes fell on the battlefield and said coldly, "Are you satisfied with this gift from this king?" Xia Xiyu nodded crazily and laughed. "Yes, I'm so satisfied. If it weren't for the small number, with this Black Water Army, I would have been able to wipe out the remnants of the aristocratic families and sects on the northern frontier without anyone's help." Lin Yuan shook his head gently and sneered, "That's not your job. These Shuel cavalry weren't defeated soldiers who accidentally ran into the northern frontier. They were able to pass through the territories of various rebel armies in the north, and they were able to hide from the eyes and ears of the Imperial Secret Guards and Li Zhongxing at the front line. They were able to send a group of 50,000 Shuangjian dynasty knights into our territory. This isn't something an ordinary person can do." Xia Xiyu's smile stopped abruptly. He put down the telescope in his hand and said coldly, "Sir Shifter Emperor, do you mean that someone is plotting against us behind our backs? Who is it? The one on the other side of the Wei River?" Lin Yuan shook his head again and said indifferently, "Lei Qiuxing is still counting on us to help him fight the rebel armies in the north, and help him wipe out the aristocratic families in the north. It's already unkind of him to not give us money and food. Do you think he's still plotting against us?" Then, Xia Xiyu paused for a moment, and the killing intent in his eyes grew stronger. Chapter 457. At present, the Xinwu dynasty seemed to be in chaos. But in fact, it was not a certain family or a certain person. It was the imperial power group headed by Zhang Xiu and Lei Qiusheng. It was the magnate group with the aristocratic families and sects as its backbone. It was the southern group with Lei Qiuming and the southern merchants as its backbone. It was the northern frontier group headed by Lin Yuan. These four forces were the real culprits under all the chaos in the Xinwu dynasty, and they were also the ones who could laugh to the end in this chaos. The other three forces were Lin Yuan's biggest opponents now, and they were also the enemies that he had to face in order to unify the whole Xinwu dynasty. Although the current situation was not clear, everyone could see that since Lin Yuan implemented the new policy in the northern frontier, the attitude of the aristocratic families and sects in the Xinwu dynasty had changed slightly. In this power game where the four forces fought against each other, the magnate group that was attacked by the other three forces at the same time was bound to be the first to be kicked out, and this process was constantly accelerating. However, during this period of time when the magnate group was about to be kicked out, the attitude of each family was very important. Among the three forces, the weakest one had to be chosen to suppress the other two forces at the same time, and it was also the last buffer. When this force was swallowed up by the other two forces, it would be the time for the final winner to be chosen. You and the Black Water Army will leave the northern frontier starting tomorrow. Lin Yuan glanced at Xia Xiyu and still said calmly, Li Zhongxing will arrange a ship to send you to the south. When you get there, there will naturally be someone to pick you up. You just have to listen to his command. His thoughts are my thoughts. Even if he makes a mistake, it is my responsibility. Do you understand? To put it bluntly, Lin Yuan was very clear that what he had done in the north had violated the interests of the whole south. Once he opened up the situation here, the Xinwu dynasty would be free to reorganize the south. At that time, whether it was Lei Qiusheng, who wanted to arm wrestle with Lei Qiusheng, or the interest groups in the south who wanted to gain benefits in this chaotic world, not only would they not get the price they wanted, but they would also have to face the troops of the Xinwu dynasty and bear the losses that they should not bear. Therefore, these Shuel Yao cavalrymen from the Shuangjian dynasty, under the promise of some people, quietly bypassed the main battlefield between the northern frontier and the Xinwu dynasty, and used the passage opened for them by the aristocratic families in the northern frontier to sneak into the northern frontier. They planned to take advantage of tonight when the entire army of the northern frontier was focused on the three rebellious cities, and then spread their influence to other gathering places, causing chaos in the northern frontier. They would not give up until they forced the northern frontier to return to the front line for the southern expedition to quell the rebellion. However, no one expected that Lin Yuan still had a luxurious Black Water Army in his hands. If it is those people in the south, these Shuangjian barbarian cavalrymen should not be the killer. Should we set off later? Xia Xiyu pondered for a moment, and his face suddenly showed a serious expression. Although he was more bloodthirsty due to his personality, and perhaps not outstanding in strategy, his clarity of mind in the face of danger was definitely second to none in the northern frontier. Otherwise, Lin Yuan would not have trusted Xia Xiyu with the task of cleaning up the remnants of the sects in the northern frontier. They have other cards, but don't I? If they want to stir up trouble in the northern frontier, if I don't give the nod, they will die. Although it was only a projection without any combat power, when Lin Yuan's voice sounded, Xia Xiyu could clearly feel the unparalleled aura from Lin Yuan's body, and even subconsciously shivered. I have other things to do, so I will leave the command here to you. After cleaning up these Shuangjian barbarian cavalrymen, you will set off immediately. When Lin Yuan finished speaking, the projection had already dissipated. At this moment, the battle at the front had reached a climax. The 13th prince looked at the one-sided battle with bloodshot eyes and said fiercely, "If you can't deal with these infantrymen, then don't fight them head-on. Use the mobility of the cavalry and drag these infantrymen down. I don't believe that such sturdy armor can be as light as cloth. Go around them, and we can still slaughter the northern frontier." After all, the 13th prince was an existence who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He knew very well that there was no absolute victory or defeat on the battlefield. Although the Black Water Army had stopped them here, once they displayed the mobility of the cavalry, these damned infantrymen could only eat dust behind them. When the cities of the northern frontier fell one by one into their hands, these black-armored soldiers would only feel more and more despair. The 13th prince of the Shuangjian dynasty? Remember, the one who will kill you is Zhao Guangchong. The young general who had taken the lead and killed his way into the battle with the Shuel Yao cavalryman raised the machete in his hand. After forcing away 7 or 8 Shueliao cavalrymen, he showed no signs of fear and directly charged toward the 13th prince, who was commanding the battle. Just as the other party had said, although the armor of the Blackwater army didn't affect the movement speed of the soldiers like heavy armor, it was still extremely difficult for the infantrymen to run as fast as these pure-blooded demon warhorses. If these Shuangjian barbarian cavalrymen were really allowed to escape, then the defense and attack that they were so proud of would be equivalent to nothing. One man and one horse cut a bloody path through the cavalry formation of the Shuangjian dynasty and headed straight for the 13th prince. The 13th prince was terrified. He waved the machete in his hand and roared angrily, "Are you all F***king idiots? This general of the northern frontier is wearing that strange black armor. Just cut off his head. Why do you have to attack his body?" The deputy general who accompanied the 13th prince sighed and reached out to grab the 13th prince's reins. He said in a low voice, "This general of the northern frontier is quite extraordinary. Those cavalrymen won't be able to do anything to him. Your Highness, take your personal guards and go ahead. I will go and meet him." As soon as he finished speaking, the deputy general skillfully turned the 13th prince's warhorse around and then used the scabbard to viciously slap the horse's butt. He watched as the 13th prince and his horse quickly disappeared from sight. Only then did he pull the reins and turn the horse around to meet the enemy. However, at this time, Zhao Guangchong was already standing in front of him in a daze. The deputy general didn't even have time to raise the machete in his hand before he felt a chill on his neck. His vision spun, and before his consciousness completely dissipated, he vaguely saw a headless corpse on the back of a horse. Zhao Guangchong? What a familiar name. Xia Xiyu reached out to touch his chin. A moment later, a touch of surprise flashed through his eyes. What the F***ck? The Northern Frontier Academy set up a martial arts class in Shunning City for only 2 months, and they have already discovered such a fierce general? Is it because there are too many talents buried in the Northern Frontier? Or is the Northern Frontier Academy of the Demon Emperor too abnormal? Chapter 458. Whoosh! A sharp sound broke through the air, interrupting Xia Xiyu's contemplation. A fire arrow with a lit arrowhead swayed in the darkness as if it had pierced through the darkness. Its speed was several times faster than those terrifying demonic beasts and warhorses. From the moment Xia Xiyu realized that the arrow had appeared, less than 3 breaths of time had passed before the 13th prince, who had been galloping on his horse, fell from the back of his horse in fear. However, the fast, accurate, and ruthless arrow was merely a signal. Immediately after, hundreds and thousands of flaming arrows were shot out from Shunning City behind Xia Xiyu. They exceeded the range that people originally knew and accurately shot down the 13th prince's personal guards one by one. On the other side, the black-armored soldiers had also completely cleared the area. The Shueliao cavalry that had stayed behind had now become corpses strewn all over the ground. About 30 Shueliao cavalry had knelt down and begged to surrender. However, what they received in response was a brazen descent of bone knives. No surrender, no begging to surrender, no advancing without military orders, no retreating without military orders. When they moved, they were like fire, and when they were still, they were like a mountain. These were the requirements of the Blackwater army that Lin Yuan had secretly trained. As the killing of the enemy ended, the archers who had killed the Shueliao cavalry slowly walked out of Shunning City. These archers were also wearing armor woven from black dragon scales, but the materials used were much smaller. It was more like the attire worn by hunters on the northern frontier. Sharp daggers made from the bones of crimson steel mastiffs were tied to their calves, which seemed to be their only weapon for close combat. Each archer carried 3 quivers on their back, and the arrows they used were also made from the bones of crimson steel mastiffs. Each quiver was filled with 25 arrows. When this group of about 20,000 to 30,000 archers fired a volley of arrows, even Shen Lin Jun would be shot into a sieve. After all, crimson steel mastiffs were famous in the northern frontier. Their bones could be used as sharp weapons with a little polishing. Moreover, the flesh of these demonic beasts would bring a lot of heat for an hour after consumption. In the past, the hunters who hunted in the Hengduan Mountains would always carry 1 or 2 kilograms of crimson steel mastiff's flesh with them. Even if the mountains were blocked by heavy snow, they would not freeze to death in the mountains. The crimson steel mastiffs had a very strong reproductive ability. If 2 crimson steel mastiffs of the opposite sex had enough food, they could expand their population to nearly 1,000 in just 2 months. Even if a crimson steel mastiff hadn't awakened to become a demonic beast, it could still easily kill tigers and leopards. However, their lifespans were very short. Even intelligence realm crimson steel mastiffs could only live for 20 years. Moreover, once they died for more than 4 hours, their flesh and bones would become a pile of garbage. They had to be preserved using special methods. Most importantly, although crimson steel mastiffs could be seen everywhere on the northern frontier, once they reached adulthood, they could fight against spirit awakening realm demonic beasts. Moreover, once they became demonic beasts, they could easily fight against demonic beasts of a higher realm. Due to their short lifespans, the crimson steel mastiff's cultivation speed was extremely terrifying. A 3-year-old crimson steel mastiff was at least intelligence realm level 6. Without a certain level of strength, anyone who provoked them would die. It was worth mentioning that the crimson steel mastiffs were very protective of each other. In the northern frontier, tigers had wantonly hunted and killed crimson steel mastiffs, resulting in a beast tide. When faced with a beast tide made up of crimson steel mastiffs, the 7 border cities had joined forces and paid the price of nearly 1 million casualties to repel the beast tide. Therefore, the flesh and bones of crimson steel mastiffs were extremely valuable items on the northern frontier. However, in Lin Yuan's hands, they were worthless toys. He had casually produced tens of thousands of sets of bows, bone blades, and daggers for the Blackwater Army. Just these weapons alone were comparable to 3 Frost Mirror Corps at the same level as the Blood Liao Knights. This one-sided slaughter seemed spectacular, but after comparing the equipment of both sides, it seemed reasonable. This general, Qin Yu, greets the commander. A tall young man walked out from the group of archers. He looked to be in his 20s and had a strong body. His eyes were especially cold even when he was not in a combat state. Xia Siyu couldn't help but think of Xiao En, who was currently in charge of the demon-human army. It was just that he didn't know whose shooting skills were more terrifying, compared to the archers who called themselves tree elves under Xiao En. It seemed unreasonable that Lin Yuan could raise a force like the Blackwater Army in just 2 months. However, when Xia Siyu thought about it carefully, he still felt that it was reasonable. After all, the northern frontier had always been known for its bitter cold. Anyone who had the slightest ability in the northern frontier would develop towards the south. As for those who stayed in the northern frontier, even if they had extraordinary talent, they could not make a name for themselves under the control of the aristocratic families and sects in the northern frontier. Even if they could obtain resources for cultivation, true geniuses would not be willing to be dogs for others. Just like the first-generation members of the Association of the Demon Emperor who followed Lin Yuan, they were all outstanding people. Otherwise, they would not have been able to develop the Association of the Demon Emperor to its current scale. However, they never thought of themselves as Lin Yuan's dogs. This was because even if Lin Yuan wanted to command them to do something, he would have to pay a corresponding price as a reward. Therefore, the relationship between the two parties had always been that of collaborators. Whether it was Qin Yu or Zhao Guangchong, they were all geniuses who had been buried in the northern frontier. Lin Yuan gave them resources and a stage, and they immediately shed their dusty appearance and were replaced by the current Blackwater Army. They had received benefits from Lin Yuan, so naturally, they would serve Lin Yuan. Of course, if there was a better place to go, Lin Yuan would not stop them. This was because whether it was Lin Yuan or them, they all believed that even if the 7 grand dynasties tried their best to catch up, their potential would not be comparable to the future northern frontier. After all, what they were going to play with next were all left behind by Lin Yuan. Of course, this was because these geniuses had been buried for too long. In addition, the refugees from all over the world had flooded into the northern frontier. This was why so many promising talents could emerge in such a short period of time. Once the Northern Frontier Academy had been established for a long time, the geniuses would be discovered one by one. The remaining people would require a large amount of time and resources to nurture. It would be impossible for so many terrifying existences to emerge without anyone noticing. You are the private soldiers trained by the Demon Emperor. Regarding this mission, you know about it earlier than me and are more detailed than me. Xia Siyu nodded at Qin Yu and said expressionlessly, "What we are going to do next is to go to the south and perfectly carry out the mission given by the Demon Emperor. Everyone relies on their own abilities to make a living, so I won't say those cheering words." At this point, Xia Siyu paused and said loudly, "Now everyone, line up and prepare to depart." Chapter 459. Ah, Lord Dragon King, you have given me a good show. Ding Zai followed behind Lin Yuan, smiling as he flattered Lin Yuan. Through the same method of projection, Lin Yuan showed Ding Zai the video of the first battle between the Blackwater Army and the Blood Liao cavalry. Towards this Blackwater Army that had suddenly appeared, even someone as strong as Ding Zai had to be vigilant. This was because the time it took for the Blackwater archers to reach Xiaxiyu from Shunning City did not exceed 5 breaths. The shooting distance was also far beyond Ding Zai's knowledge. If he was in the position of the Blood Liao cavalry, he would never have thought that the archers of the northern frontier could kill these people from such a long distance. Similarly, as long as Lin Yuan ambushed an army of the same level as the Blackwater archers, they would only need 1 round of shooting. Ding Zai's cultivation that he was so proud of would not be of any use. Before he had stepped into the Void Realm, these archers could easily take his life. If flattery was useful, the divine martial empire would not have fallen to such a state. Lin Yuan's strange-colored eyes paused on Ding Zai for a moment. He sneered, "You people keep saying that you have no thoughts about the Sky Martial Continent. The so-called 7 great empires, the various aristocratic families, and the killing between the sects in your eyes are like ants fighting. But once things are out of your control, you will always think of using force to change everything into what you think it should be. The chaos of the Shenwu dynasty was like this, and everything that happened in the northern frontier tonight was also like this." After being unmasked by Lin Yuan, Ding Zai only felt cold sweat on his back. He braced himself and said, "Lord Demon Emperor, although those big shots above have already transcended the secular world, their inheritance needs to be left behind. Their disciples also need resources to cultivate. If we let the secular world continue to fight like this, there will be fewer and fewer people guarding the gate of heaven. This world, sooner or later, will fall. What are you afraid of? I didn't say what you did was wrong." Lin Yuan glanced at Ding Zai and said with a faint smile, "It's just that your selfishness is too heavy. You all want to have absolute control over the so-called secular world. In fact, in the end, you all still haven't transcended enough. You still care about who you listen to in this little piece of land that you control. I don't believe that with the 7 great empires united, the resources that can be provided can't be compared to the current situation where each of you is doing your own thing. Even more so, I don't believe that the demonic beast clan can cause chaos in the world once they leave their gathering place. The matter of the demonic beasts is indeed not easy to handle." Ding Zai shook his head with a bitter smile and said solemnly, "It's not that I'm not willing to do my best for Lord Spirit Demon Emperor, it's just that the Spirit Demon race and Spirit Demon race have been at odds with each other for too long, and both sides hate each other. Once the shackles of the Spirit Demon beasts are released, even if the world is not in chaos, but the various places will definitely not be as peaceful as they are now, and a massacre that will engulf the entire Sky Martial continent is inevitable." "It's not easy." Lin Yuan continued to follow Ding Zai's words, and the coldness in his eyes intensified. He said coldly, "In the end, isn't it just that the demonic beast clan has too few experts guarding outside the Heaven's Gate? Without the right to speak, there is naturally no space for survival. What those fellows can protect is the Hengduan mountain range, a place for the demonic beasts to reproduce." Ding Zai bowed to Lin Yuan, but didn't dare to open his mouth to continue the conversation. The truth was the same as what Lin Yuan had thought. The demonic beast clan had too few experts, and without the peak experts to speak, the demonic beasts could only live like livestock that could be slaughtered. But the truth was like this, and words couldn't be said so bluntly. Otherwise, other than offending others, there wouldn't be any benefits. In 4 months, the northern frontier has grown from nothing. Not to mention that I can annex the Shenwu dynasty, but if I use all my trump cards, it's just like playing a game if I want to rule the Shenwu dynasty across the Wei River." Lin Yuan didn't even look at Ding Zai, and continued to walk in the direction of Taicang City. He said indifferently, "My meaning is very clear. You can go back and ask your superiors. It's your business what you think of my proposal, but whether I do it or not, you can't stop me. Pardon me for asking, but if we agree, what can the demonic beast emperor do? If we don't agree, what can the demonic beast emperor do?" Ding Zai stretched out his hand to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead, and asked with a respectful expression. He was very clear that the Black Jiao in front of him had countless ways to kill him, but the other party's request was too big, and it was no longer something that a small fry like him could decide. So he had to figure out Lin Yuan's context and bottom line before he could decide how to report to his superiors. Do you agree or not? The whole north of the Shenwu dynasty will also be under my rule. Lin Yuan grinned and said, if you are willing to give me this status, I can guarantee that the resources in your hands will be much more than when the Shenwu dynasty controlled the north. You can see this by looking at the northern frontier now. The territory that can only slowly decay in their hands and be slowly annexed by the aristocratic families will blossom in a different light in my hands. Speaking of this, Lin Yuan paused for a moment, narrowed his eyes, and added, of course if they don't agree, the other 6 dynasties will definitely not let me go. But with the Hengduan mountain as a shield, this king is not afraid of challenges. If they defeat this king, the northern frontier will become what it was before. You won't lose, but you won't gain. But if they can't defeat this king... Gulp! Ding Zai swallowed a mouthful of saliva heavily. Then what this king wants is not as simple as the north of the Shenwu dynasty. Lin Yuan's voice sounded slowly. Ding Zai suddenly felt that the temperature around him seemed to have dropped by dozens of degrees. He couldn't help but start to shiver. He said slowly, Demon Emperor, you are making trouble for me. Lord Shifter Emperor, you are making things difficult for me. Although our Shanglu Association has a certain degree of control in the Shenwu dynasty, you can also see that Lei Qiuxing is gradually dissatisfied with being controlled by us. Otherwise, things wouldn't have escalated to this point. If you want the northern territory, we will definitely be willing to give it to you. However, we can't control Lei Qiuxing's opinion right now. Then there's the other 6 empires. That's not something our Upper Deer Association can control. You also know that all the families and sects are now in control of this area. For example, the Shenwu dynasty is not only controlled by our Shanglu Association, but also the other 6 dynasties. I will definitely report your request truthfully, but you know how difficult it is to get everyone to agree. Even if you are destined to become one of those big shots in the future, you definitely don't have the face to do so now. If you want me to persuade the other big shots to agree, that's fine. But the question is, what can you give us? Chapter 460. As long as you ask, this king can give you anything. But the problem is, does the Shanglu society dare to take all of this for themselves? Lin Yuan's voice was filled with mockery. His words were still aimed at Ding Zai's Achilles' heel. The northern frontier was now in high demand. Even if those big shots who guarded the heavenly gate said that they were not interested in the secular world, Lin Yuan felt that these fellows who were still attached to secular power were not so easy to get rid of. Otherwise, existences like the Shanglu Society, the Four Alliance Society, and even Zhang Xiu would not constantly think of infiltrating the northern frontier. However, with the current prosperous conditions of the northern frontier, it was not something that could be done by any Tom, Dick, or Harry. First, the operation of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce required a demonic beast that could control the situation. Furthermore, this demonic beast had to have a good view of the overall situation. It would not take all the benefits for itself. It had to know who to give benefits to and who not to give benefits to. It had to be able to make everyone obediently acknowledge the existence of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. It was not like what the Ether Society thought, that any random beast king would be able to take over the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. To put it bluntly, the beast kings in the Hengduan Mountains were all arrogant and unruly existences. If they fell out with each other, who would be easy to provoke? Lin Yuan could be said to have a halo around him. Firstly, he had the endorsement of 3 great beast kings and the favor of Beast King Kirin. They even privately believed that Lin Yuan would be the next Beast King's successor. Other than these objective factors, there was also the Scarlet Flame Swamp next to the Stoneclaw Forest and some of the Beast King's territories. Now, it had completely turned into a paradise for the demonic beasts. Without Lin Yuan as a shield, who knew how many Beast Kings would suffer? The most important thing is that Lin Yuan has the merit of opening up new territories. Ever since the demonic beasts retreated into the Hengduan Mountains and struggled at death's door, their greatest achievement was to temporarily destroy the cities built by humans near the demonic beast forest. However, just like how the beast tide reduced the number of low-level demonic beasts, these border cities were also a means for humans to reduce the excess population. However, Lin Yuan was different from the demonic beasts in the Hengduan Mountains. His achievements were real. Now the entire northern frontier was like a sweet cake in Lin Yuan's hands. Except for Lin Yuan, no one could even think of ordering the northern frontier. If another demonic beast replaced Lin Yuan's position and didn't get the approval of the Beast Kings in the Hengduan Mountains, they would think that if they could take over Lin Yuan's territory, why couldn't they? At that time, a battle would be inevitable. But even if they could figure out who could take over the northern frontier's territory, it would still depend on the attitude of the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. After all, Lin Yuan controlled the northern frontier because these people were obedient to him. Even if they weren't loyal to Lin Yuan, they still had to obediently work for Lin Yuan. However, once Lin Yuan was gone, and another demonic beast replaced him, the prince's mansion in the northern frontier would have the right to choose. What was the use of being willing to cooperate with the prince's mansion in the northern frontier? It was hard to say whether they would even take a liking to you. This was also the main reason why Lin Yuan could be so arrogant in front of Ding Zai. Because behind all the prosperity in the northern frontier, it couldn't be separated from him, the Black Jiao who appeared out of nowhere. Before they could think of a way to replace Lin Yuan, once something happened to Lin Yuan, the great situation in the northern frontier would be gone. The so-called high buildings could also collapse in an instant. Sir Demon Emperor, please don't play word games with me. Ding Zai changed his previous submissive attitude and looked at Lin Yuan seriously, saying in a deep voice, "You can skillfully divide every piece of cake in your hands between the northern frontier and the Hengduan Mountains. Then you also have the ability to let everyone eat the benefits. As the saying goes, the upper deer society eats alone. Please don't say any more. The upper deer society doesn't dare and won't eat alone." Eating alone was delicious, but it was easy to choke to death. Now, the output of the northern frontier alone was comparable to half of the Shenwu dynasty. Just the fact that the upper deer society was connected to Lin Yuan alone made many forces jealous. In terms of distribution of benefits, if Lin Yuan was determined to give the upper deer society too much, the various forces wouldn't touch Lin Yuan, but they would definitely attack the upper deer society together until their forces in the secular world were completely destroyed. Then what do I want you for? Without you, Butcher Ding, can't I eat pigs with hair? If you aren't willing to show your sincerity to talk to me, then let's not talk. I believe there are many people who are willing to talk to me. Lin Yuan's tone became more and more playful, and his words became more and more bold. Of course, it was impossible for the upper deer society to eat alone, because Lin Yuan giving them special treatment was no different from feeding them poison. However, as an existence that was connected to Lin Yuan, no one would have any objections if the upper deer society took more. This was because this was one of the advantages of the upper deer society. Otherwise, Ding Zai wouldn't insist on tying himself to Lin Yuan. However, how to control this still required everyone to sit down and slowly negotiate. Ding Zai's current intention was obviously to let Lin Yuan suffer in silence. It was no problem to give a large amount of benefits to the upper deer society for a name, but these benefits definitely wouldn't be included in the cake shared by everyone. They were all from Lin Yuan's own pocket. As a person in his previous life, Lin Yuan had experienced countless schemes and schemes. Ding Zai's little scheme naturally couldn't escape his eyes. Since they weren't willing to talk, then they might as well not talk. Everyone would shed all pretense of cordiality and not interact with each other. In any case, Lin Yuan was now very sensitive. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't get involved if they touched him, so no one would touch him. Especially after the matter with Kong Lezin, when the various clans sent experts to attack the northern frontier, they would have to consider whether Lin Yuan had the ability to make their experts stay in the northern frontier forever. And to use the power of the secular world? That was even more of a joke. Any of the 7 great empires would definitely not gain any advantage if they went head-to-head with Lin Yuan. Who would be willing to suffer such a loss? This is your last chance. I want you to reach the bottom line of the upper deer society. If you still make me feel that you are not sincere, then let's not talk anymore. Lin Yuan stared at Ding Zai and directly used his killer move. In any case, there are countless pairs of eyes staring at the northern frontier. Once you reach the upper deer society, the negotiations with this king will fall apart. There are plenty of people who are willing to put down their status and have a good chat with this king on how to divide the benefits. Forced into a corner by Lin Yuan, Ding Zai helplessly sighed and said in a deep voice, "If Lord Demon Emperor says so, then I have no other choice." Frankly speaking, the upper deer society will have to pay a price to persuade the other clans. You also know that although everyone is willing to facilitate this matter, Whoever speaks will be ruthlessly ripped off. And this price will definitely not be paid by the Upper Deer Society. Do you understand? Chapter 461. Understood. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. Since the Shanglu Association had contacted him, they would definitely get a bigger share of the cake than the others. It might not be obvious once or twice, but over time, it would be a considerable amount of wealth. If it was exchanged for cultivation resources, it would be enough for the younger generation of the Shanglu Association to pull ahead of the younger generation of the other factions by a large margin. Although everyone had tacitly agreed to such a matter, it did not mean that everyone could pinch their noses and accept it. Before they split the cake, everyone would definitely sit together and ruthlessly rip off the Shanglu Association. This price would definitely not be a small sum. Even the Shanglu Association would have to suffer a loss. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, the Shanglu Association would definitely not agree. Unless this price was paid by Lin Yuan. Seeing that Lin Yuan had given an affirmative answer, Ding Zai clearly heaved a sigh of relief. Therefore, we have nothing else to discuss. Please return. The teasing in Lin Yuan's voice disappeared and was replaced by an unwavering indifference. Lord Demon Emperor. Ding Zai watched as Lin Yuan's speed suddenly increased and instantly disappeared from his sight. He suddenly felt a stifling sensation in his chest. The Shanglu Association was a faction with a top-notch expert overseeing it. They had always placed great importance on nurturing their younger generation. Ding Zai being able to form a connection with Lin Yuan gave him a lot of bonus points. Once this deal was concluded, Ding Zai would definitely receive a lot of rewards when he returned to the Shanglu Association. However, apart from the results, there was also a process. Therefore, the Shanglu Association also paid attention to how to negotiate the division of benefits with Lin Yuan. The more Lin Yuan paid, the less the Shanglu Association would have to pay, and the more benefits Ding Zai would receive. Therefore, Ding Zai repeatedly bargained with Lin Yuan. In the end, Ding Zai still hoped that Lin Yuan would pay all the price. So now that Lin Yuan had abandoned him, Ding Zai actually couldn't even refute him. Because until just now, Lin Yuan had given him enough face. It was his own greed that caused Lin Yuan to leave. Moreover, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan would be able to infer the thoughts and concerns of those people, even though he hadn't come into contact with them. At the same time, Ding Zai was clear about his own position. He understood that even if the negotiations fell through, there would still be other forces contacting him. So Lin Yuan wasn't in a hurry at all. A sneer suddenly rang out, and a moment later, a figure wearing a black hooded robe appeared out of thin air on a nearby tree trunk. The black-clothed man looked down at Ding Zai and clicked his tongue. Listen, no wonder he's an ambitious and ruthless person. Without you, Butcher Ding, wouldn't he still be eating hairy pigs? I gave you so many chances, but you didn't cherish them. Ha ha ha. Then it's our lofty gorge estate's turn to reap the benefits. As his voice faded, the black-clothed man flashed and disappeared from Ding Zai's sight once again. Ding Zai's face was crimson red. Just as he was about to step forward to stop him, another two figures dressed similarly to the previous black-clothed man suddenly appeared in front of him. The two of them didn't say a single word as they brandished their long sabers and attacked Ding Zai from both sides. It was obvious that they had planned this for a long time and didn't want Ding Zai to leave this place at all. You're courting death. Ding Zai's face darkened. His body surged with energy, and without dodging, he directly grabbed the two long sabers and shattered them. Then, without even retracting his hands, he grabbed the throats of the two black-clothed men and killed them in an instant. Only then did he move to chase in the direction that the previous black-clothed man and Lin Yuan had disappeared. About 4 to 5 breaths later, Ding Zai arrived at a clearing that had been cut out. Only then did he realize that on those tree stumps, there were many familiar and unfamiliar existences sitting there. It was obvious that the various top forces were very eager to invest in Lin Yuan, this potential stock. Therefore, after Ding Zai angered Lin Yuan, these monsters all emerged from the corners and gathered here. Ding Zai couldn't help but feel his scalp go numb. Looking at Lin Yuan, who was surrounded by the crowd, a feeling of fear suddenly spread out from the depths of Ding Zai's heart. The current Ding Zai's thoughts of persuading Lin Yuan to pay the price and let Upper Deer Association gain a large share of the benefits had completely vanished when he saw these monsters. Ding Zai was very clear about the methods of Upper Deer Association. Towards traitors and trash, Upper Deer Association had always been merciless. The originally favorable situation had collapsed because of his greed. Now that Ding Zai had completely sobered up, he was very clear that he had offended Lin Yuan. If he returned to Upper Deer Association, he would definitely be punished and reprimanded. Moreover, if Lin Yuan were to form connections with others and completely throw Upper Deer Association to the side, then he, Ding Zai, would definitely have no way out. All of you, stop making so much noise. Ding Zai's eyes were bloodshot as he took 2 steps forward. Suddenly, he roared. Feeling the mocking, curious and mocking gazes, Ding Zai quickly walked to Lin Yuan's side. His gaze swept across the people that represented the various forces and loudly said, "I, Ding Zai, have done something wrong. I accept my punishment. However, it's not a good idea for all of you to gather here and make a ruckus like a bunch of women. If all of you keep on chattering like this, you won't be able to come up with anything by the time the sun rises. Then tell us, what should we do?" The black-clothed man from Lofty Gorge Prefecture sneered and coldly said, "Don't tell me that you still haven't woken up from your dream and still think that Lord Shifter Emperor still treats your Upper Deer Association as a treasure? You have to know that there are many forces that are on par with your Upper Deer Association. There are even more than 10 forces that are stronger than your Upper Deer Association. If you want to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, why don't you take a look at yourself first?" The moment the black-clothed man finished speaking, the surrounding forces all roared with laughter. Lofty Gorge Prefecture and Upper Deer Association were on par with each other. Moreover, they were both top forces that controlled a region of the Shenwu dynasty. Both sides usually had friction with each other. Although it wasn't to the extent of alerting the higher-ups, there were fights between those below the Void Realm every day. The black-clothed man humiliating Ding Zai was within everyone's expectations. The reason why these forces cooperated with the black-clothed man was mostly because of jealousy and hatred. When Upper Deer Association first entered the northern frontier, they didn't have any good intentions. However, Ding Zai just had to mix with Lin Yuan, and both sides even had a period of sweetness. At one point, the various forces felt that Upper Deer Association would definitely be able to seize control of the northern frontier and become the strongest existence among the top forces behind the Shenwu dynasty. At that time, most of the secular forces in Lofty Gorge Prefecture would be destroyed, and they wouldn't end up well either. However, Ding Zai screwed up himself and made Lin Yuan decisively abandon Upper Deer Association. Only then did they have a chance. If they didn't take revenge on Ding Zai for being on tenterhooks, they really wouldn't be able to swallow this anger. Chapter 462. I'm not treating myself as a treasure. I'm just saying that you guys won't be able to come to a conclusion even if you quarrel here. Ding Zai regained some of his composure amidst the laughter. He took 2 steps forward with a cold face and said in a low voice, "To put it bluntly, isn't it a hot potato for any of you to obtain something that the Upper Deer Council can't get? Can the High Gorge residents take it? Can the Four-Way Alliance take it? Whoever takes this benefit won't incur the wrath of the masses?" The moment he said that, the surrounding representatives all lowered their heads, not daring to look at Ding Zai directly. Indeed, the northern frontier was too tempting. Furthermore, Lin Yuan's ambition was not just the northern frontier. He had the ambition and the ability to make the entire north his territory. By then, the benefits of the entire north would definitely be shared by everyone. But the northern frontier was now independent. Whoever could gain more from the northern frontier would become stronger in the future. But their strength would definitely cause their opponents to be unable to sit still. By then, it was not impossible for them to be ganged up on. "Then what do you say, what should we do?" One of the representatives scratched his head and asked in a low, muffled voice. "Let's bid." Ding Zai's lips curled up. That ordinary face suddenly had a hint of madness. He said loudly, "Aren't you all here talking to the Demon Emperor about the benefits of choosing you? Then let's use our abilities to speak. Whoever can make the Demon Emperor complete this matter with the lowest price will take that share. By then no one can say anything. How about it?" The moment Ding Zai's voice fell, all the representatives began to whisper among themselves. But when they were discussing, they looked at Ding Zai as if they were looking at a lunatic. Just as Ding Zai said, it was actually useless for them to gather here and talk nonsense with Lin Yuan. Because none of the representatives were fools. They would not let go of such a fat piece of meat like the northern frontier. So, they were all lowering their own conditions and getting closer to the bottom line given by their superiors. Including Ding Zai, all these people had the same attitude. This piece of meat from the northern frontier must be eaten, even if the price was as low as chicken ribs and tasteless. This was because no matter how much they paid to take over the northern frontier, there would definitely be a day when they would be able to make a small profit. However, if they allowed others to take over the northern frontier, they would be ostracized sooner or later. They might not even be able to defend their current territory. Therefore, they were just wasting time here, because everyone had the same goal. If they ate it, they wouldn't give it to them even if they felt nauseous. However, no one would be as straightforward as Ding Zai. What Ding Zai was doing now was equivalent to letting them bid. Everyone would call out their bottom line price one by one. Whoever gave the lowest price would be one step closer to taking over the northern frontier. But to be honest, doing such things behind people's backs wasn't a big deal. But if you did it in public, it would be too embarrassing. Ding Zai's suggestion was obviously to make everyone lose face together. Originally, they could still negotiate with Lin Yuan. But now, it had become the lowest price to take over the northern frontier. The gap between them could be imagined. Using the bidding method to settle this matter, it was impossible for so many people to argue. When the time came, they would just have to call out one by one. If they couldn't suppress the other, they wouldn't have a chance. They couldn't possibly sell off their own underwear just to disgust others, right? This fellow must be crazy. The representative from Lofty Gorge Prefecture muttered softly. His eyes were filled with helplessness. Who would have thought that after being rejected by Lin Yuan, Ding Zai would still chase after them and come up with such a disgusting idea? And yet, none of them dared to say a single word. After all, with so many representatives present, Lin Yuan would be able to sit firmly on the fishing platform. No matter how low the price you offered was, as long as your attitude wasn't good, he would still choose not to cooperate with you. Ding Zai looked around and sneered. No one is speaking, right? Weren't you all quite talkative just now? Then I'll take the lead. Our Shanglu Association is willing to help Lord Shifter Emperor take over the entire northern frontier. The price paid in the meantime will be borne by our Shanglu Association. When Ding Zai's voice fell, everyone's face twitched crazily. The representative from Lofty Gorge Prefecture glared at Ding Zai and said coldly, Ding Zai, are you F** King playing with us? Ding Zai immediately shouted out everyone's bottom line. It meant that Lin Yuan didn't have to do anything, and they just had to hand over the entire northern frontier of the Shenwu dynasty to Lin Yuan. At that time, the 7 dynasties wouldn't have any attitude, let alone suppress Lin Yuan. Even if Lei Qiuxing objected, the other 6 dynasties and the Hengduan mountain range behind Lin Yuan would join forces to pressure Lei Qiuxing and force him to agree to this matter. But the problem was, if Ding Zai had shown this attitude earlier, or even offered a higher price, the Shanglu Association and Lin Yuan would have already formed a contract. How could things have developed to this point? Now that all of them had stood out, wasn't Ding Zai doing this just to disgust them? Humans were creatures that were easily swayed by emotions. This had nothing to do with cultivation. Just like how those top-notch big shots were unwilling to give up worldly power, being swayed by emotions was a bad habit that humans were born with. Unless one was an unparalleled ruthless person who was pure of heart and had no human nature, at certain times, humans would definitely do something that they would regret afterwards. For example, right now, an old man with white hair and beard slowly stood up and said expressionlessly, The Supreme Palace will repeat all the conditions of the Shanglu Association. After you take over the entire northern frontier, we promise not to ask for any reward for the next 10 years. When the old man finished speaking, many people's expressions changed. They thought Ding Zai was crazy just a moment ago, but now he was F***King killing them. Not asking for any reward for the next 10 years was equivalent to letting Lin Yuan monopolize the entire northern frontier for 10 years. With Lin Yuan's cultivation speed, even if he couldn't compare to those top bosses in 10 years, he would definitely be one of them. By then, the northern frontier of the Shenwu dynasty would be his own territory. Who would dare to ask for benefits from Lin Yuan? What was the difference between this and working for free? Oh, there was a difference. This was F***King working for free. Soon, another representative stood up and said in a deep voice, I will repeat all the conditions of the previous two. Also, I will select a 3 million strong elite army from the Shuangjin dynasty under my jurisdiction to assist the Dragon King in attacking the northern frontier. Everyone's faces twitched crazily again. Great, they're starting to act now? Just to disgust others, each one was more shameless than the other. Working for free? Paying to work for free? Now, there's even paying to work for free. Chapter 463. Everyone's gaze paused on this representative for a moment, especially Ding Zai. His gaze was incomparably complicated. Behind the representatives of these forces are all the top forces that are detached from the world. As long as it does not involve survival, even the 7 great empires have to obey their orders. However, when he had a falling out with Lin Yuan, the representatives of these forces were like dogs that saw a bone and directly surrounded him. Obviously, they were all like him. When they came out from their families, they also received an errand. Even if Ding Zai could reach an agreement with Lin Yuan, these people would obstruct him and make Ding Zai lose trust in front of Lin Yuan. Ding Zai proposed this plan because he wanted to show his bottom line. Even if he couldn't obtain the right to cooperate, he could discuss these flies. After all, although the Shanglu Association wasn't considered a large organization, it wasn't the worst among the top forces. Therefore, the bottom line that Ding Zai could offer was already a price that most of the forces present couldn't bear. So what if there were more powerful forces than the Shanglu Association? In the end, they were just running errands and not the ones in charge. After paying such a huge price to complete this task, the higher-ups naturally didn't have a good impression of them. In fact, the northern frontier was not much different from a chicken rib in their eyes. Therefore, even if these people facilitated this matter, they themselves wouldn't be able to obtain any benefits from it. It would be considered good if they weren't punished. This could be considered Ding Zai's small revenge, and it was also a small thought. Although he did not succeed in this task, the person who took over the task could be considered to have suffered in silence. This way, although he would still be punished when he returned to the Shanglu Association, he would not be sentenced to death. Do you all have nothing better to do? A burly man with a red face crossed his arms in front of his chest and said in a low muffled voice, "What are you all shouting for? Think about the conditions that you all offered and see if you can do it before you speak. Since you've been discussed by Ding Zai, you all should discuss the other competitors. I want to see if no one continues to shout and the task is in your hands. How are you going to explain it when you go back?" The burly man's words were like thunder to the ears, immediately suppressing the group of representatives who were arguing fiercely. To put it bluntly, because Ding Zai had made a good start, the price they called out later was already lower than their bottom line. If it wasn't for the fact that some people were still shouting out in disgust, the crowd would have long been silent. After all, it was one thing to say it verbally, but being able to do it was another thing. Deceive Lin Yuan? What a joke. Did he think that the current Lin Yuan was still a cat or a dog that could be bullied by anyone? In a year and a half, he had gone from a wild beast to a mountain lord. There had not been many people with this kind of cultivation talent since the primordial age. Almost all of them had reincarnated mighty figures. Although the various clans had no way of investigating Lin Yuan's origins, just based on the banner of his demon court, these existences, who were the current top forces, knew that as long as Lin Yuan did not die prematurely, there would be a day when he would stand shoulder to shoulder with the big shots behind them. At that time, if Lin Yuan held a grudge in his heart, what was the difference between crushing wage-earners like them to death as if they were bugs? Lin Yuan immediately became the focus of everyone's attention. After pondering for a moment, he said with a smile, "Let's just treat what happened before as a small episode to lighten the atmosphere. You've all calmed down now, right? Why don't we make a new offer?" The representatives of the various forces all nodded in agreement. After all, they had already called out the price before. Lin Yuan would stay at the northern frontier and not move, and they would personally lead the troops to conquer the north of the Shenwu dynasty. Then they would divide the Shenwu dynasty into 2 parts and let Lin Yuan become the guardian of the 8th dynasty. They would also allow him to freely overthrow the so-called emperor of the 8th dynasty. Moreover, they also promised that they would not give Lin Yuan any benefits in the next 50 years. This condition was actually a dream come true. If there was such a good deal, why would Ding Zai fall out with Lin Yuan just because of some gains and losses? Of course, the main reason why the burly man spoke was because he couldn't continue with this. Not to mention that these conditions were impossible to fulfill. Even if there were any forces that were willing to do it, they wouldn't work for Lin Yuan for free. If Lin Yuan did not tactfully open his mouth to agree, although the other party would also pinch his nose and carry out the plan in accordance with the contract, there would be an unsolvable grudge between the two sides, and no one would be able to live a peaceful life in the future. Therefore, when the burly man spoke, Lin Yuan took the initiative to step down from the stage given by the other party. It could be considered as giving the representatives of these forces a chance to think calmly. Because Ding Zai had already called out a price before, his goal could be considered to have been achieved. Naturally, he wouldn't open his mouth to offend the representatives of these forces. Instead, he obediently stood at the back, waiting for the battle of words to start. Without Ding Zai taking the lead, the representatives of the other forces also started to whisper. After all, everyone knew that as long as the first person to speak was able to lower the price enough, the chances of a deal being struck would be very high. However, if they did that, not only would their own benefits be reduced, they would also offend the other forces who had come from afar. Although there was only one northern frontier, how many opportunities were there in the Tianwu continent? Although people who did things to the extreme could be happy for a moment, but if they were to encounter a similar situation in the future, who would give them face? Lord Dragon King, my family is willing to step forward and let the Shenwu dynasty repair the relationship between you and them, and let them promise to hand over the legal rights of the northern frontier to you. At that time, however much you can eat will be yours. Be it the Shenwu dynasty or the other 6 great empires, they will definitely not find trouble with you. According to the usual practice, 40% of the territory's income will be handed over to us to be divided equally. If Lord Dragon King agrees, my family will take 15%. A slightly weaker force's representative took the initiative to speak. He had never thought of forming a contract with Lin Yuan under the watchful eyes of a pack of wolves. However, it was not right to flick his sleeves and leave, and it was also not right to stay here and waste time. Thus, he might as well toss the bait. The conditions he offered were not high, but it definitely could not be said that he had lowered the price. After all, 40% of the income was originally going to be handed over to the Heavenly Gate Protector. According to the unspoken rules, the force that facilitated this matter for Lin Yuan, other than their own share, could also ask for some private goods from Lin Yuan. However, this person did not mention a single word about it. Instead, he restricted all the benefits to the items that Lin Yuan was originally going to spend on. Lord Dragon King, my family? Lord Dragon King, I. Since someone had taken the lead and offered a reasonable price, the rest of the people did not have any qualms about speaking, and they all stood up to express their intentions. However, this time when they opened their mouths, everyone deliberated for a moment and did not shout out hot-headedly like before. Chapter 464. 2 flowers bloomed, one on each side. Let's not talk about Lin Yuan's bidding meeting where all the heroes gathered. Then there was the situation in Taicang City. Big Brother Lin, who was standing outside the government office, looked at the gray-robed family leader with a complicated look on his face and said in a deep voice, "Brother, this government office is not easy to fight. I'm also short on manpower, so I can only give you about 100 late-stage airborne realm fighters to ease your urgency. Go to the other government offices and see if you can borrow some people from them." Without those private soldiers of the family holding back the main forces of the northern frontier, it was impossible for them to break out of the battle formation by themselves. Even if they were able to escape, there were only about a dozen Heaven Dipper realm experts. Moreover, the northern frontier was still Lin Yuan's territory. The embroidered uniform guards and the Demon Emperor would join forces to investigate. Even if they could fly, they wouldn't be able to hide for long. The granary was their only life-saving straw at the moment. Once the northern frontier fell into a food shortage, chaos would inevitably rise. At that time, the families would have a way to survive. With the food in their hands, they could make countless people of the northern frontier, who were unwilling to starve to death, put down their dignity and become their accomplices in the rebellion. No matter how good the people of the northern frontier were at fighting, could they kill all the people of the northern frontier? Then, thank you, Brother Lin. There was a smile in the gray-robed family head's voice, but the next moment, the plot was revealed. The moment he raised his head, his eyes were full of cold light. Even if Brother Lin had a warning in his heart, a short knife was accurately stabbed into his abdomen before he could withdraw and retreat. Almost at the moment when he was stabbed, Brother Lin had already begun to mobilize the spiritual qi in his body. However, the short knife was stabbed in his dantian, which was the place where the spiritual qi had to travel through the meridians in the body. Moreover, it was obvious that the short knife was dipped in poison. Once his spiritual qi passed through his dantian, it quickly melted as if it had encountered a burning ice. Coupled with the fact that his vital part was stabbed, Brother Lin instantly lost his strength and directly collapsed to the ground. Why? The pale-faced elder Brother Lin stared blankly at the gray-robed family master. His eyes dimmed as he asked. There were at least 1 million private armies left behind by the various clans in the periphery. Even if the people of the northern frontier prince's mansion were extremely capable, they would not be able to take over the streets in the periphery without making any noise. Therefore, the situation was very clear. The clan heads who were in charge of the periphery had retreated under the attack of the northern frontier prince's mansion and had become traitors among them. Lin Sihai, you took care of me back then, so I'll let you die knowing the truth. Your rebellion is full of loopholes. What a joke. If the Northern Region Lord's palace isn't strong enough to deal with the rebellion, or even be on par with us, then you can do this. But they have an overwhelming advantage in terms of military power. The 3 cities are surrounded by them. Let's not talk about helping each other. Right now, those who are in trouble are probably waiting for us to go and help them. This is considered a defeat. The so-called half a month was just your wishful thinking. In fact, the rations of the people in the northern frontier could last for at least 3 months, or even until the autumn harvest. Not to mention that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was connected to the 7 great empires. The moment something happened to Taitsong, the caravans had already set out to buy rations. When you woke up from your dream, the northern frontier would not be in chaos. This is a second defeat. In addition, you kept saying that it was for the benefit of the clans. Let me ask you, the small clans had already done the hard work of the cannon fodder. You guys hid in the inner city and blocked the entrance of a few government offices. You guys said that you did your best, but in the end, the benefits would definitely be taken by the big clans. You guys lost the support of the people at the beginning. This is a third defeat. Do you think that the actions of the other settlements were quickly destroyed because the forces planted there were weak? No, it's because our every move is under the control of the northern frontier. They are not afraid of us rebelling, but they are afraid that we will hide in the dark and play tricks for them. I have repeatedly advised you that this is not the time to start a rebellion, but you guys don't listen. You insist that this is the best opportunity. Now, everyone is in trouble, and you dare to ask me why? It's because we want to live. Is this reason enough? The gray-robed clan leader obviously did not have much intention to save face for Lin Sihai. His face was calm, but every word was hurtful. Lin Sihai opened his mouth but was unable to utter a single word. That was because he saw hundreds of men in black, all of whom were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm, pouring out from the streets and alleys, heading straight for the government office. 1,000 words can be summed up into one sentence. You guys are not worthy of my advice. The head of the gray-robed family sneered and said in a cold voice, You old bastards who live in the past glory, die with your own beautiful dreams and unwillingness. Don't worry, in the coming great era, I will lead the aristocratic families on the right path. Like the Qiao clan and the Shui clan, we will become the tide of the new era. Although Lin Sihai had been poisoned, he had only lost some strength. He wouldn't be able to breathe for a while. After hearing what Lin Sihai said, he couldn't help but sneer. After saying so much, it's all because you, Chen Zifeng, are jealous of the Shui family's rise. In the future, the Shui family's descendants will be taken care of by the Northern Region King's mansion. Your Chen family situation isn't even as good as the Shui family's, so of course you want to hug the Black Flood Dragon's thigh. But unfortunately, the backbone of my family has been destroyed by you. From now on, the descendants of the family under the Black Flood Dragon's rule won't have a good life. If the Northern Region King's mansion wants to control you, then even if you break the heavens, you won't be able to escape misfortune. That's not right. Chen Zifeng shook his head and said indifferently, I can see the future pattern of the northern frontier, but can't you see it? It's nothing more than relying on the power of the clans, thinking that their descendants can enjoy the glory even if they are ignorant. If your Lin clan's descendants are as good as the Chao clan's descendants, or as tough as the Shui clan's descendants, will you resist the arrival of the new era? Well said. Chen Zifeng's voice fell, and he saw a Confucian scholar in a snow-white robe, with 4 golden armored guards around him. It was Li Zhong, who was in charge of the new policy in the northern frontier. Li Zhong walked in front of Lin Sihai as if he was taking a stroll, and said expressionlessly, "This brother is right, the days where the clans can enjoy the glory and splendor have completely come to an end. In the future, the northern frontier will be turbulent, and it will depend on your own means, and those with a little self-confidence will be waiting for the arrival of the new era. The end of the clans has come." Chapter 465. Ha 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 ha. Cough. Cough. Lin Sihai stared at Li Zhong as if he had heard a joke. He suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed. As he laughed, he suddenly coughed up 2 mouthfuls of black blood. His face had turned red before he finished coughing up the poisonous blood. The 3 cities revolted and supported each other. They controlled Taizong and waited for the chaos in the northern frontier. All the plans had failed the moment the outer defense line of Taizong City was broken. Even if the rest of the aristocratic families in the city struggled desperately, it was only a matter of time before they died. For the Wang mansion in the northern frontier, the aristocratic family's obedience was no longer important. With the Chao family, the Shui family, and the aristocratic families like Chen Zifeng willing to join them, the northern frontier could not advance, but it could certainly maintain the current situation. In this way, they could accumulate more money and grain and plan for greater reforms. As Li Zhong and Chen Zifeng said, the old era was completely over. At the very least, this was the case in the northern region. At the very least, before the emergence of powerful masters like Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing in various aristocratic families and sects, this old era had ceased to exist. As for whether the descendants of the aristocratic families of the later generations could restore their current authority, it would take thousands of years. Anyway, these descendants of the aristocratic families had already become people waiting for death. Lin Sihai finally gasped for breath. He still had a sneer on his face and said coldly, "Chen Zifeng, I'll go first. Let's see what good fate you people who are willing to be dogs will have in the future. Besides, you Li Zhong, don't forget, before you, there have been 2 kings of the northern frontier. How long do you think you can stay in this position? I'll go first and wait for you down there." When his voice fell, the expression on Lin Sihai's face froze. The light in his eyes became unfocused. He had actually died. "Clean up the battlefield." Li Zhong ordered the guard of the Jin family beside him. Then he walked toward the government office with a calm face. "You are Li Zhong? I heard that the Black Jiao thinks highly of you." Suddenly, a pale and almost bloodless palm gently rested on Li Zhong's shoulder. Li Zhong slowly turned his head and saw a young man with mixed black and white hair looking at him with a faint smile. Clang! 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 The surrounding guards of the Jin family immediately drew out their swords and stared at this strange young man who had suddenly appeared. They actually didn't notice at all. They only saw a blur in front of their eyes, and this strange young man appeared behind Li Zhong like a ghost without a trace. This made them feel humiliated, and at the same time, they were secretly shocked by this strange young man's terrifying strength. The strange young man didn't even turn his head. He only let out a soft snort, and the 4 golden armored guards seemed to have lost their ability to move. At the same time, Lin Yuan also negotiated the price with the representatives of the aristocratic families. First of all, the annual output of the entire north must be handed over to the various forces guarding the gate of heaven. This was an unshakable rule. As for how this profit would be divided, it was an internal matter of these top forces. In addition, with Lin Yuan's declaration, although the north of the Xinwu dynasty still belonged to the Xinwu dynasty, it had already been promised to Lin Yuan in name. As long as Lin Yuan had the ability to take over the north, the other 6 empires would not dare to interfere. Don't underestimate this name. With the recognition of these top forces, the future battle between Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing would be a battle between the 2 empires. The winner would naturally inherit the entire Xinwu dynasty and wouldn't even need a name. The loser would lose everything. Life and death would be decided by the winner. This allowed the battle to be controlled within the scope of Lin Yuan's control. It wouldn't evolve into a chaotic battle between humans and demonic beasts for territory. After all, no matter how tough Lin Yuan's methods were, before he had enough strength and power, he couldn't contend against the general trend and become an enemy of the entire human race. Although Lin Yuan didn't admit defeat, he knew very well that if he took over the northern frontier without this name, it was tantamount to stewing himself in an iron pot. Not to mention whether the humans in the northern frontier would stand on Lin Yuan's side. Even if they still maintained their loyalty to Lin Yuan, using the power of one region to contend against the entire Tianwu continent was the same as the aristocratic families in the northern frontier joining forces to challenge the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. There could only be one word to describe it: overconfidence. In addition to these basic terms, the representatives of the forces controlling the Shuangjin Empire and the Qingjiang Empire also stated that they would ask the two empires' troops to refuse to make peace with Lei Qiuxing and continue to delay the main forces of the Shenwu dynasty at the border. Although this was originally the idea of the two empires, with their affirmation, the two empires would stop at a certain point, and the top forces would agree. At least, before the battle between Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing at the Weishui River, Lei Qiuxing's main forces wouldn't come back to help. Because until then, Lei Qiuxing would definitely not shrink the front line to fight with Lin Yuan at the risk of the destruction of the country. Of course, since everyone had contributed to this matter, Lin Yuan naturally had to express his gratitude. Therefore, he took out an extra 10% of the profits every year and evenly distributed it to the top forces who participated in this matter. This made the representatives of the forces whose dynasties were not bordering the Shenwu dynasty beat their chests and stamp their feet. The Tianwu continent was a very strange place. The structure of the forces here was different from the novels that Lin Yuan had read to pass time in his previous life. It was not like the wuxia novels where the imperial court was formed by experts who absolutely suppressed the various sects and aristocratic families. It was also not like the Xianxia novels where a single sect ruled countless empires. The top forces on the Tianwu continent and the various empires restrained each other. For example, in terms of combat strength, the 7 empires together might not be able to defeat a top force. However, if they were really forced to a corner, the top forces would directly cut off their source of income, and everyone would perish together. Therefore, the big shots of these top forces could do a favor to Lin Yuan, but they definitely could not force the empires under their rule to directly sail to the south of the Shenwu dynasty to cooperate with Lin Yuan, because the emperor of the empires was destined to not give them face. However, to be able to negotiate to this point, Lin Yuan could already be considered to be satisfied, and would not ask for more. All the top forces had tasted the sweetness, but they could only curse in their hearts. This was because Lin Yuan's attitude was very ambiguous. He did not directly tie himself to any one of the empires, but rather made his attitude clear. Whoever cooperated with him would be able to taste the sweetness. In this way, if any of the top forces wanted to reap benefits from Lin Yuan, they would have to wear the same pants as him. No matter what Lin Yuan did, they would have to cooperate with him. If Lin Yuan could profit, they would naturally also profit. Although they would not receive the full support of a top force, they could still be considered to be well off and did not form any grudges with anyone. Furthermore, they had laid the foundation for future cooperation. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.